The HOGBEN Chronicles by Henry Kuttner. This is a series of 5 related stories which were originally serialized throughout the 1940s in Thrilling Adventures magazine, 2 of which appear in The Best of Henry Kuttner from 1975, which includes a very personable and lovingly written introduction from Ray Bradbury. There exist a total of 5 stories, but the first, entitled The Old Army Game from 1941, is not actually science fiction at all. Its only connection to the others is in the name of Hogben, which the central character bears, and so this story will be read last, so that anyone not interested can tune out at that point. The second story is called Exit the Professor and was published in 1947, 6 years after the first. The remainder each appeared within the next 2 years, with Pile of Trouble being next in 1948, followed by See You Later in 1949, and concluding with Cold War in the same year. 2 of the 5, The Old Army Game and Pile of Trouble, were written solely by Kuttner, without Moore, his wife. Read by Darrell T. Smith II for my channel, Quasar Spectra. Exit the Professor. We Hogbens are right exclusive. That professor fella from the city might have known that, but he come bustin' in without an invite, and I don't figure he had call to complain afterward. In Kentuck, the polite thing is to stick to your own hill of beans and not come nosin' round when you're not wanted. Time we ran off the Haley boys with that shotgun gadget we rigged up, only we never could make out how it worked. Somehow, that time, it all started because Rafe Haley come peeking and prying at the shed winder trying to get a look at Little Sam. Then Rafe went round saying Little Sam had 3 haids or something. Can't believe a word them Haley boys say. 3 haids. It ain't natural, is it? Anyhow, Little Sam's only got 2 haids and never had no more since the day he was born. So Ma and I rigged up that shotgun thing and peppered the Haley boys good. Like I said, we couldn't figure out afterward how it worked. We tacked on some dry cells and a lot of coils and wires and stuff, and it punched holes in Rafe as neat as anything. Coroner's verdict was that the Haley boys died real sudden, and Sheriff Abernethy come up and had a drink of corn with us and said for 2 cents he'd whale the tar out of me. I didn't pay no mind. Only some damn Yankee reporter must have got wind of it, because a while later a big fat serious-looking man come round and begun to ask questions. Uncle Les was sitting on the porch with his hat over his face. "You better get the heck back to your circus, mister," he just said. "We had offers from old Barnum hisself and turned 'em down. Ain't that right, Sonk?" "Sure is," I said. "I never trusted Phineas. Called Little Sam a freak, he did." The big, solemn-looking man, whose name was Professor Thomas Galbraith, looked at me. "How old are you, son?" he said. "I ain't your son," I said, "and I don't know nohow." "You don't look over 18, he said. "Big as you are, you couldn't have known Barnum." "Well, sure I did. Don't go giving me the lie. I'll wham you." "I'm not connected with any circus," Galbraith said. "I'm a biogeneticist." We sure laughed at that. He got kind of mad and wanted to know what the joke was. "There ain't no such word," Ma said. And at that point, Little Sam started yelling, and Galbraith turned white as a goose wing and shivered all over. He sort of fell down. When we picked him up, he wanted to know what had happened. "Well, that was Little Sam," I said. "Ma's gone in to comfort him. He's stopped now." "But that was a subsonic," the professor snapped. "What is Little Sam, a shortwave transmitter?" "Little Sam's the baby," I said, short-like. "Don't go calling him out of his name either. Now suppose you tell us what you want." He pulled out a notebook and started looking through it. I'm a scientist, he said. Our foundation is studying eugenics, and we've got some reports about you. They sound unbelievable. One of our men has a theory that natural mutations can remain undetected in undeveloped cultural regions, and he slowed down and stared at Uncle Les. Can you really fly? He asked. Well, we don't like to talk about that. The preacher gave us a good dressing down once. Uncle Les had got liquored up and went sailing over the ridges, scaring a couple of bear hunters out of their senses. And it ain't in the good book that men should fly neither. Uncle Les generally does it only on the sly when nobody's watching. So anyhow, Uncle Les pulled his hat down further on his face and growled. Well, that's plumb silly. Ain't no way a man can fly. These here modern contraptions I hear tell about, between ourselves, they don't really fly at all. Just a lot of crazy talk, that's all. Galbraith blinked and studied his notebook again. But I've got hearsay evidence of a great many unusual things connected with your family. Flying is only one of them. I know it's theoretically impossible, and I'm not talking about planes. But, oh shit, you're trap. The medieval witches' salve used aconite to give an illusion of flight, entirely subjective, of course. Will you stop pestering me? Uncle Les said, getting mad on account of he felt embarrassed, I guess. Then he jumped up, threw his hat down on the porch, and flew away. After a minute, he swooped down for his hat and made a face at the professor. He flew off down the gulch, and we didn't see him for a while. I got mad, too. You got no call to bother us, I said. Next thing Uncle Les will do, like Pa, and that'll be an awful nuisance. We ain't seen hide nor hair of Pa since that other city feller was around. He was a census taker, I think. Galbraith didn't say anything. He was looking kind of funny. I gave him a drink, and he asked about Pa. Oh, he's around, I said, only you don't see him no more. He likes it better that way, he says. Yes, Galbraith said, taking another drink. Oh, gosh, how old did you say you were? Didn't say nothing about it. Well, what's the earliest thing you can remember? Ain't no use remembering things. Clutters up your head too much. It's fantastic, Galbraith said. I hadn't expected to send a report like that back to the Foundation. We don't want nobody prying around, I said. Go away, leave us alone. But good heavens! He looked over the porch rail and got interested in the shotgun gadget. What's that? A thing, I said. What does it do? Things, I said. Oh, may I look at it? Sure, I said. I'll give you the dingus if you'll go away. He went over and looked at it. Pa got up from where he'd been sitting beside me, told me to get rid of the damn Yankee, and went into the house. The professor came back. Extraordinary, he said. I've had training in electronics, and it seems to me you've got something very odd there. What's the principle? The what? I said. It makes holes in things. Wait, can't fire shells. You've got a couple of lenses where the breech should... Well, how did you say it worked? Well, I don't know. Did you make it? Me and Ma. He asked a lot more questions. I don't know, I said. Trouble with a shotgun is you got to keep loading it. We sort of thought if we hooked on a few things, it wouldn't need loading no more. It don't neither. Were you serious about giving it to me? If you stop bothering us. Listen, he said, it's miraculous that you hogbens have stayed out of sight so long. We got our ways. The mutation theory must be right. You must be studied. This is one of the most important discoveries since... He kept on talking like that. He didn't make much sense. Finally, I decided there was only two ways to handle things, and after what Sheriff Abernathy had said, I didn't feel right about killing nobody till the sheriff had got over his fit of temper. I don't want to cause no ruckus. Suppose I go to New York with you, like you want, I said. Will you leave the family alone?" He halfway promised, though he didn't want to. But he knuckled under and crossed his heart on account of I said I'd wake up little Sam if he didn't. He sure wanted to see little Sam, but I told him that was no good. Little Sam couldn't go to New York anyhow. He's got to stay in his tank or he gets awful sick. Anyway, I satisfied the professor pretty well, and he went off. After I'd promised to meet him in town next morning, I felt sick, though. I can tell you. I ain't been away from the folks overnight since that ruckus in the old country when we had to make tracks fast. Went to Holland, as I remember. Ma always had a soft spot for the man that helped us get out of London, named Little Sam after him. I forget what his name was, Gwyn or Stuart or Pips. I get mixed up when I think back beyond the war between the states. That night we chewed the rag. Pa being invisible, Ma kept thinking he was getting more than his share of the corn, but pretty soon she mellowed and let him have a demijohn. Everybody told me to mind my P's and Q's. "This here's Professor Awful Smart," Ma said. "All professors are. Don't go bother him any. You'll be a good boy or you'll catch heck from me." "I'll be good, Ma," I said. Pa whaled me alongside the hay, which wasn't fair on account of I couldn't see him. "Well, that's so you won't forget," he said. "We're plain folks," Uncle Les was growling. "No good never came of trying to get above yourself." "Honest, I ain't trying to do that," I said. "I only figured you stay out of trouble," Ma said, and just then we heard Grandpa moving in the attic. Sometimes Grandpa don't stir for a month at a time, but tonight he seemed right frisky. So, naturally, we went upstairs to see what he wanted. He was talking about the professor. "A stranger, eh?" he said. "Out upon the stinking nave. A set of rare fools I've gathered about me for my dotage. Only Sonk shows any shrewdness, and dang my eyes, he's the worst fool of all." I just shuffled, muttered something on account of I never liked to look at Grandpa direct, but he wasn't paying me no mind. He raved on. "So you'd go to this New York, s'blood, and hast thou forgot the way we shunned London and Amsterdam, and New Amsterdam for fear of questioning? Wouldst thou be put in a freak show, nor is that the worst danger? Grandpa's the oldest one of us all, and he gets kind of mixed up in his language sometimes. I guess the lingo you learned when you're young sort of sticks with you. One thing, he can cuss better than anybody I've ever heard." "Shucks," I said. "I was only trying to help." "Thou Poland brat," Grandpa said. "'Tis thy fault and thy dam's. For building that device, I mean, that slew the Haley tribe. Hadst thou not, this scientist would never have come here." "He's a professor," I said. "Name of Thomas Galbraith." "I know. I read his thoughts through little Sam's mind. Dangerous man. I never knew a sage who wasn't, except perhaps Roger Bacon, and I had to bribe him to... but Roger was an exceptional man. Hearken. None of you may go to this New York. The moment we leave this haven, the moment we are investigated, we are lost. The pack would tear and rend us, nor could all thy addle-pated flights skyward save thee. Lester, dost thou hear?" "But what are we to do?" Ma said. "Oh, heck," Pa said. "I'll just fix this professor. I'll drop him down the cistern." "And spoil the water?" Ma screeched. "You try it." "What foul brood is this that has sprung from my seed?" Grandpa said, real mad. "Have ye not promised the sheriff that there will be no more killings, for a while at least? Is the word of a hogben naught? 2 things have we kept sacred through the centuries, our secret from the world, and the hogben honor. Kill this man Galbraith, and you'll answer to me for it." Well, we all turned white. Little Sam woke up again and started squealing. "But what'll we do?" Uncle Les said. "Our secret must be kept," Grandpa said. "Do what you can, but no killing. I'll consider the problem." He seemed to go to sleep then, though it was hard to tell. The next day I met Galbraith in town, all right, but first I run into Sheriff Abernathy in the street, and he gave me a vicious look. "You stay out of trouble, Sonk," he said. "Mind what I tell you now." It was right embarrassing. Anyway, I saw Galbraith and told him Grandpa wouldn't let me go to New York. He didn't look too happy, but he thought there was nothing he could be done about it. His hotel room was full of scientific apparatus and kind of frightening. He had the shotgun gadget set up, but it didn't look like he'd changed it any. He started to argue. "Ain't no use," I said. "We ain't leaving the hills. I spoke out of turn yesterday, that's all." "Listen, Sonk," he said. "I've been inquiring around town about you Hogbens, but I haven't been able to find out much. They're close-mouthed around here. Still, such evidence would be only supporting factors. I know our theories are right. You and your family are mutants. You've got to be studied." "We ain't mutants," I said. "Scientists are always calling us out our names. Roger Bacon called us homunculi, only—" "What?" Galbraith shouted. "Who did you say?" He's a sharecropper over in the next county," I said, hasty-like, but I could see the professor didn't swallow it. He started to walk around the room. "It's no use," he said. "If you won't come to New York, I'll have the Foundation send a commission here. You've got to be studied for the glory of science and the advancement of mankind." "Oh, golly," I said. "I know what that'd be like. Make a freak show out of us. It'd kill little Sam. No, you got to go away and leave us alone." "Leave you alone? When you can create apparatus like this?" He pointed to shotgun gadget. "How does that work?" he wanted to know, sudden-like. "I told you. I don't know. We just rigged it up. Listen, Professor, there'd be trouble if people came and looked at us. Big trouble. Grandpa says so." Galbraith pulled at his nose. "Well, maybe. Suppose you answer a few questions for me, Sonk." "No commission?" "We'll see." "No, sir, I won't." Galbraith took a deep breath. "As long as you tell me what I want to know, I'll keep your whereabouts a secret." "I thought this Foundation thing of yours knows where you are." "Ah, yes," Galbraith said. "Naturally they do, but they don't know about you." That gave me an idea. I could have killed him easy, but if I had, I knew Grandpa would have ruined me entire, and besides, there was the sheriff to think of. So I said, "Shucks," and nodded. My, the questions that man asked. It left me dizzy, and all the while he kept getting more and more excited. "How old is your grandfather?" "Gosh, I don't know." "Homunculi. You mentioned that he was a miner once?" "No, that was Grandpa's pa," I said. "Tin mines they were, in England. Only Grandpa says it was called Britain then. That was during a sort of magic plague they had then. The people had to get the doctors, druids? The druids was the doctors then," Grandpa says. "Anyhow, all the miners started dying round Cornwall, so they closed up the mines." "What sort of plague was it?" I told him what I remembered from Grandpa's talk, and the professor got very excited and said something about radioactive emanations, as nearly as I could figure out. It made uncommon bad sense. "Artificial mutations caused by radioactivity," he said, getting real pink around the jowls. "Your grandfather was born a mutant. The genes and chromosomes were rearranged into a new pattern. Why, you may all be Supermen." "Nope," I said. "We're Hogbens, that's all. Obviously a dominant. All your family are. Peculiar." "Now look," I said. "I mean, they could all fly?" "Well, I don't know how yet myself. I guess we're kind of freakish. Grandpa was smart. He always taught us not to show off." "Protective camouflage," Galbraith said. "Submerged in a rigid social structure, variations from the norm are more easily masked. In a modern civilized culture, you'd stick out like a sore thumb. But here in the backwoods, you practically invisible." "Only Pa," I said. "Oh, gosh," he sighed. "Submerging these incredible natural powers of yours, do you know the things you might have done?" And then, all of a sudden, he got even more excited, and I didn't much like the look in his eyes. "Wonderful things," he repeated. "It's like stumbling on Aladdin's lamp." "I wish you'd leave us alone," I said. "You and your commission." "Forget about the commission. I've decided to handle this privately for a while, provided you'll cooperate. Help me, I mean. Will you do that?" "Nope," I said. "Then I'll bring the commission down from New York," he said triumphantly. I thought that over. "Well," I said finally, "what do you want me to do?" "I don't know yet," he said slowly. "My mind hasn't fully grasped the possibilities." But he was getting ready to grab. I could tell. I know that look. I was standing by the window looking out, and all of a sudden I got an idea. I figured it wouldn't be smart to trust the professor too much anyhow, so I sort of ambled over to the shotgun gadget and made a few little changes on it. I knew what I wanted to do all right, but if Galbraith had asked me why I was twisting a wire here and bending a whoosies there, I couldn't have told him. I got no education. Only now I knew the gadget would do what I wanted it to do. The professor had been writing in his little notebook. He looked up and saw me. "What are you doing?" he wanted to know. "Well, this don't look right to me," I said. "I think you monkeyed with them batteries. Try it now." "In here?" he said, startled. "Well, I don't want to pay a bill for damages. It must be tested under safety conditions. See that weathercock out there on the roof?" I pointed it out to him. "It won't do no harm to aim at that. You could just stand here by the window and try it out. It isn't dangerous?" He was aching to try the gadget. I could tell. I said it wouldn't kill nobody, and he took a long breath and went to the window and cuddled the stock of the gun against his cheek. I stayed back a ways. I didn't want the sheriff to see me. I'd already spotted him, sitting on a bench outside the feed and grain store across the street. It happened just like I think. Galbraith pulled the trigger, aiming at the weathercock on the roof, and rings of light started coming out of the muzzle. There was a fearful noise. Galbraith fell flat on his back, and the commotion was something surprising. People began screaming all over town. I kind of felt it might be handy if I went invisible for a while, so I did. Galbraith was examining the shotgun gadget when Sheriff Abernathy busted in. The sheriff's a hard case. He had his pistol out and handcuffs ready, and he was cussing the professor immediate and rapid. "I seen you," he yelled. "You city fellers think you can get away with anything down here. Well, you can't." "Sonk," Galbraith cried, looking around, but of course he couldn't see me. Then there was an argument. Sheriff Abernathy had seen Galbraith fire the shotgun gadget, and he's no fool. He drug Galbraith down on the street, and I come along, walking soft. People were running around like crazy. Most of them had their hands clapped to their faces. The professor kept wailing that he didn't understand. "I seen you," Abernathy said. "You aimed that dingus of yours out the window, and the next thing everybody in town's got a toothache. Try and tell me you don't understand. The sheriff's smart. He's known us Hogbens long enough so he ain't surprised when funny things happen sometimes. Also, he knew Galbraith was a scientist feller, so there was a ruckus and people heard what was going on, and next thing they was trying to lynch Galbraith. But Abernethy got him away. I wandered around town for a while. The pastor was out looking at his church windows, which seemed to puzzle him. They was stained glass, and he couldn't figure out why they was hot. I could have told him that. There's gold in stained glass windows. They use it to get a certain kind of red. Finally, I went down to the jailhouse. I was still invisible, so I eavesdropped on what Galbraith was saying to the sheriff. It was Sonk Hogben, the professor kept saying. I tell you, he fixed that projector. I saw you, Abernethy said. You done it. Ow! He put up his hand to his jaw. And you better stop it fast. That crowd outside means business. Half the people in town have got toothaches. I guess half the people in town had gold fillings in their teeth. Then Galbraith said something that didn't surprise me too much. I'm having a commission come down from New York. I meant to telephone the foundation tonight. They'll vouch for me. So he was intending to cross us up all along. I kind of felt that had been in his mind. You'll cure this toothache of mine and everybody else's, or I'll open the doors and let in that lynch mob, the sheriff howled. Then he went away to put an ice bag on his cheek. I snuck back a ways, got visible again, and made a lot of noise coming along the passage so Galbraith could hear me. I waited till he got through cussing me out. I just looked stupid. I guess I made a mistake, I said. I can fix it, though. You've done enough fixing. He stopped. Wait a minute. What did you say? You can cure this. What is it? I've been looking at that shotgun gadget, I said. I think I know what I did wrong. It's sort of turned in on gold now, and all the gold in town's shooting out rays or heat or something. Induced selective radioactivity, Galbraith muttered, which didn't seem to mean much. Listen, that crowd outside, do they ever have lynchings in this town? Not more than once or twice a year, I said. And we already had 2 this year, so we filled our quota. Wish I could get you up to our place, though. We could hide you easy. You'd better do something, he said, or I'll get that commission down from New York. You wouldn't like that, would you? I never seen such a man for telling lies and keeping a straight face. It's a cinch, I said. I can rig up the gadget so it'll switch off the rays immediate. Only I don't want people to connect us Hogbens with what's going on. We like to live quiet. Look, suppose I go back to your hotel, change over the gadget, and then all you have to do is get all the people with toothaches together and pull the trigger. But... He was afraid of more trouble. I had to talk him into it. The crowd was yelling outside, so it wasn't too hard. Finally, I went away, but I came back, invisible-like, and listened when Galbraith talked to the sheriff. They fixed it all up. Everybody with toothaches was going to the town hall and set. Then Abernethy would bring the professor over with the shotgun gadget and try it out. Will it stop the toothaches? The sheriff wanted to know. For sure? I'm quite certain it will. Abernethy had caught that hesitation. Then you'd better try it on me first, just to make sure. I don't trust you. It seemed like nobody was trusting nobody. I hiked back to the hotel and made the switch over in the shotgun gadget. Then I run into trouble. My invisibility was wearing thin. That's the worst part of being just a kid. After I'm a few hundred years older, I can stay invisible all the time if I want to. But I ain't right mastered it yet. Thing was, I needed help now because there was something I had to do, and I couldn't do it with people watching. I went up on the roof, called Little Sam. After I'd tuned in on his head, I'd put the call through to Pa and Uncle Les. After a while, Uncle Les come flying down from the sky, riding mighty heavy on account of he was carrying Pa. Pa was cussing because a hawk had chased them. "Nobody's seen us, though," Uncle Les said. "I think." "People got their own troubles in town today," I said. "I need some help. That professor's going to call down his commission and study us, no matter what he promises." "Ain't much we can do then," Pa said. "We can't kill that feller. Grandpa said not to." So I told him my idea. Pa being invisible, he could do it easy. Then we made a little place in the roof so we could see through it and look down into Galbraith's room. We was just in time. The sheriff was standing there with his pistol out, just waiting, and the professor, pale around the chops, was pointing the shotgun gadget at Abernathy. It went along without a hitch. Galbraith pulled the trigger. A purple ring of light popped out, and that was all, except that the sheriff opened his mouth and gulped. "You wasn't faking. My toothache's gone." Galbraith was sweating, but he put up a good front. "Sure it works," he said. "Naturally, I told you. Come on down to the town hall. Everybody's waiting. You better cure us all, or it'll be just too bad for you." They went out. Pa snuck down after them, and Uncle Les picked me up and flew on their trail, keeping low to the roofs where we wouldn't be spotted. After a while, we was fixed outside one of the town hall's windows, watching. I ain't heard so much misery since the Great Plague of London. The hall was jam full, and everybody had a toothache and was moaning and yelling. Abernathy come in with the professor, who was carrying the shotgun gadget, and a scream went up. Galbraith set the gadget on the stage, pointing down at the audience, while the sheriff pulled out his pistol again and made a speech, telling everybody to shut up and they'd get rid of their toothaches. I couldn't see Paul, naturally, but I knew he was up on the platform. Something funny was happening to the shotgun gadget. Nobody noticed except me, and I was watching for it. Paul, invisible of course, was making a few changes. I told him how, but he knew what to do as well as I did. So pretty soon the shotgun was rigged the way we wanted it. What happened after that was shocking. Galbraith aimed the gadget and pulled the trigger, and rings of light jumped out. Yaller this time. I told Paul to fix the range so nobody outside the town hall would be bothered, but inside the hall, well, it sure fixed them toothaches. Nobody's gold filling can ache if he ain't got a gold filling. The gadget was fixed now, so it worked on everything that wasn't growing. Paul had got the range just right. The seats was gone all of a sudden, and so was part of the chandelier. The audience, being bunched together, got it good. Peg-leg Jeff's glass eye was gone, too. Them that had false teeth lost 'em. Everybody sort of got a once-over lightly haircut. Also, the whole audience lost they clothes. Shoes ain't growing things, and no more pants or shirts or dresses. In a trice, everybody in the hall was naked as needles. But, shucks, they got rid of their toothaches, hadn't they? We was back to home an hour later, all but Uncle Les, when the door busted open and in come Uncle Les, with the professor staggering after him. Galbraith was a mess. He sank down and wheezed, looking back at the door in a worried way. "Funny thing happened," Uncle Les said. "I was flying along outside town, and there was a professor running away from a big crowd of people with sheets wrapped around him, some of them, so I picked him up. I brung him here like he wanted." Uncle Les winked at me. "Oh," Galbraith said. "Ah, are they coming?" Ma went to the door. "They's a lot of torches moving up the mountain," she said. "It looks right bad." The professor glared at me. "You said you could hide me. Well, you'd better. This is your fault." "Shucks," I said. "You'll hide me or else." Galbraith squalled. I'll bring that commission down. Look, I said, if we hide you safe, will you promise to forget all about that commission and leave us alone? The professor promised. Hold on a minute, I said, and went up to the attic to see Grandpa. He was awake. How about it, Grandpa? I asked. He listened a little, saying for a second. The knave is lying, he told me pretty soon. He means to bring his commission of stinkards here anyway. Reckon naught of his promise. Should we hide him then? Aye, Grandpa said. The Hogbens have given their word there must be no more killing, and to hide a fugitive from his pursuers would not be an ill deed, surely. Maybe he winked. It's hard to tell with Grandpa. So I went down the ladder. Galbraith was at the door watching the torches come up the mountain. He grabbed me. Sonk, if you don't hide me, we'll hide you, I said. Come on. So we took him down to the cellar. When the mob got here with Sheriff Abernathy in the lead, we played dumb. We let him search the house. Little Sam and Grandpa turned invisible for a bit, so nobody noticed them. And naturally, the crowd couldn't find hide nor hair of Galbraith. We'd hit him good like we promised. That was a few years ago. The professor's thriving. He ain't studying us, though. Sometimes we take out the bottle we keep him in and study him. Dang small bottle, too. Pile of trouble. We called Lemuel Gimpy on account of he had 3 legs. After he got his growth, about the time they fit the war between the states, he was willing to keep his extra leg sort of tucked up behind him inside his britches, where it would be out of sight and people wouldn't talk. Of course, it made him look a little like one of them camel critters, but then Lemuel never was vain. It was lucky he was double-jointed, though, or he might have got cramps from keeping the leg tucked up that way. We ain't seen Lemuel for some 60 years. He was living in the southern part of the mountains, and the rest of us was up in northern Kentucky. And I guess we wouldn't have gotten that trouble if Lemuel hadn't been so blame shiftless. It looked like big trouble for a while. We Hogbens had plenty of that before we moved to Piperville, what with people peeping and prying and trying to find out why the dogs barked so much for miles around. It got so we couldn't do no flying at all. Finally, Grandpa said we just better pull up stakes and move down south, where Lemuel was staying. I hate moving. That trip to Plymouth Rock made me sick to my stomach. I'd rather have flew, but Grandpa's a boss. He made us hire a truck and load everything in it. We had trouble getting the baby in. He don't weigh no more than 300 pounds, but that tank we got to keep him in is pretty bulky. No trouble about Grandpa, though. We just tied him up in an old gunny sack and shoved him under the seat. I had to do all the work. Pa had got at the corn liquor and was plumb silly. He kept hopping around on the top of his hay and singing something called The World Turned Upside Down. Uncle wouldn't come. He dug himself in under the corn crib and said he was going to hibernate for 10 years or so. Well, we just left him there. All this traveling around, he kept complaining. Can't stay put. Every 500 years or so, bang, traipsing off summers. Go on, get. So we got. Lemuel, the one we used to call Gimpy, he was one of the family. Seems there was a dust-up when we first came to Kentucky, the way I heard it. Everybody was supposed to pitch in and help build a house, but not Lemuel. He wouldn't. Plumb shiftless. He flew off to the south. Every year or two, he'd wake up a little, and we'd hear him thinking, but mostly he just sot. We figured we'd live with him for a while. Well, that's what we did. Seems like Lemuel lived in an old watermill in the mountains up over a town called Piperville. It was kind of ramshackle. Lemuel was on the porch. He'd been sitting in a chair, but it had fallen down some while before, and he hadn't bothered to wake up to fix it. So he sat there in the middle of his whiskers, breathing a trifle. He was having a nice dream, but we didn't wake him up. We toted the baby in the house, and Grandpa and Pa started carrying in the bottles of corn. That was how we settled in. It warn't exactly convenient at first. Lemuel was too remarkable shiftless to keep victuals in the house. He'd wake up enough to hypnotize a coon back somewheres in the woods, and pretty soon the coon would come wandering along looking dazed, ready to be it. Lemuel had to eat coons mostly because they're clever with their paws, which are sort of like hands. You can call me a weasel if that shiftless Lem didn't hypnotize the coons into building a fire and cooking themselves. I never figured out how he got the critters skun. Maybe he spit out the fur. Some people are just too lazy for anything. When he got thirsty, he made it rain a little over his head and opened his mouth. It was shameful. Nobody paid no attention to Lemuel, though. Ma got busy. Pa, naturally, snuck off with a jug of corn, and I had to do all the work. 'Twarn't much. Main trouble was we needed some sort of power. Keeping the baby alive in his tank uses up a lot of current, and Grandpa drinks electricity like a hog sucks up swill. Effin' Lemuel had kept the water running in the stream, we'd have had no trouble, but that was Lemuel. He just let it dry up. There was a trickle, no more. Ma helped me build a gadget in the hen house, and after that we got all the power we needed. Trouble all started when a skinny little runt come up the trail one day and seemed surprised to see Ma take the washing out in the yard. I trailed along, interested like. "Real nice day," Ma said. "Want a drink, stranger?" He said he didn't mind if he did, so I got him a dipper full, and he had drunk the corn. He took a few gasping breaths and said, "Thanks." No, he didn't want any more just then or ever. He said he'd cut his throat cheaper and get the same effect. "Just moved in here?" he asked. Ma said yes, we had, and Lemuel was a relative. The feller looked at Lemuel sitting on the porch with his eyes shut and said, "You mean he's alive?" "Sure is," Ma said. "Alive and kicking, so to speak." "We thought he'd been dead for years," the man said. "Well, that's why we never bothered about collecting the poll tax for him. I guess you'd better pay yours, too, now that you've moved in. How many of you are there?" "About 6, Ma said. "All of age?" "Well, there's Pa and Sonk and the baby." "How old?" "The baby's about 400 now, ain't he, Ma?" I asked, but she clouded me alongside the head and said I should shut up. The man pointed at me and said he'd meant how old was I. Heck, I couldn't tell him. I lost track round Cromwell's time. Finally, he said we'd all have to pay a poll tax except the baby. "Not that it matters," he said, writing in a little book. "You have to vote the right way in this town. The machine's in to stay. There's only one boss in Piperville, and his name's Eli Gandy. $20 that'll be." Ma told me to get some money, so I went searching. Grandpa didn't have anything except something he said was a denarius, and that was his lucky piece anyhow. He said he'd swiped it from a feller named Julius up in Gaul. Pa was dead drunk. Baby had $3. I went and looked through Lemuel's pockets, but didn't find nothing but an old Oriole's nest with 2 eggs in it. When I told Ma, she scratched her head, so I said, "We can make some by tomorrow, Ma. You'll take gold, won't you, mister?" Ma clouded me. The man looked kind of funny and said sure he'd take gold. Then he went away through the woods carrying a bundle of twigs for firewood, and I figured Lemuel was getting hungry. The man started to walk faster. I started looking for some old iron I could change into gold. Next day, we got carted off to jail. We knew about it in advance, of course, but there wasn't much we could do. It's allus been our idea to keep our heads down and not attract no special attention. That's what Grandpa told us to do now. We all went up to the attic, all but the baby and Lemuel, who never stirred, and I kept looking at a spider web up in one corner, so I wouldn't have to look at Grandpa. He hurts my eyes. Out upon them for stinkered knaves, Grandpa said. 'Tis best that we go to their gaol. The days of the Inquisition are over. 'Twill be safe enough. Can't we hide that there gadget we made? I asked him. Ma clouded me for speaking before my elders. That won't do no good, she said. Them spies from Piperville was up here this morning and seen it. Grandpa said, Have you hollowed a cavern under this house? Good. Hide me and the baby there. The rest of you... He relapsed into old-fashioned language. 'Tis pity if we were to live thus long and be found out by these black-aviced dullards. 'Twere better their weasels were slit. Nay, Sonk, I spoke in jest. We would not call attention to ourselves. We will find a way. Well, that was the way it was. We all got toted off, all but Grandpa and the baby, who were down in the cave by that time. We got carried off to Piperville and put in the hoosgow. Lemuel never woke up. They drug him off by the heels. As for Paul, he stayed drunk. He's got a trick he knows. He can drink corn, and then, as I understand it, the alcohol goes in his blood and gets changed into sugar or something. Magic, I guess. He tried to explain it to me, but it made uncommon bad sense. Liquor goes into your stomach. How can it go up inside your skull and turn into sugar? Plumb silly. Or conjure, anyhow. But what I was going to say, Paul says he's trained some friends of his named enzymes, foreigners by the name, so they change the sugar right back to alcohol, and he can stay drunk as long as he wants. Still, he likes fresh corn if he can get it. Me, I don't like them conjure tricks. They make me skittery. I was took into a room with people in it and told to sit down in a chair. They asked me questions. I played dumb. I said I didn't know nothing. It's impossible, somebody said. They couldn't have built it themselves, illiterate hillbillies, but unmistakably there's a uranium pile in their hen house. Shucks. I kept on playing dumb. After a while, they took me back to my cell. There was bed bugs. I made a sort of ray come out of my eyes and killed them off, much to the surprise of a seedy little feller with pink whiskers who was asleep in the upper bunk, and who I didn't notice was awake till it was too late. I have been in some strange prisons in my time, said the seedy little feller, blinking rapid, and I have had some unusual cellmates, but never yet have I encountered one whom I suspected to be the devil. My name is Armbruster, Stinky Armbruster, and I'm up for vagrancy. What's the charge against you, my friend? Buying souls over the ceiling price? I said I was pleased to meet him. I had to admire his language. He had education, something fearful. Mr. Armbruster, I said, I got no idea why I'm here. They just carted me off, Pa and Ma and Lemuel. Lemuel's asleep, though, and Pa's drunk. I would like to be drunk, Mr. Armbruster told me. Then I wouldn't be so surprised to see you floating 2 feet off the floor. That kind of embarrassed me. Nobody likes to be caught doing things like that. It was just that I was absent-minded, but I felt foolish. I said I was sorry. It doesn't matter, Mr. Armbruster said, rolling over and scratching his whiskers. I've been expecting this for years. I've had a pleasant life, all in all, and this is a delightful way to go crazy. Why did you say they arrested you? They said we had a uranium pile, I told him. I bet we ain't. We got a wood pile, I know, 'cause I chopped the wood, but I know I never chopped no uranium. You'd remember it if you had, he said. It's probably some political gambit. Elections a week off, there's a reform party starting, and old Gandy's smashing it before it can start. Well, we ought to be getting home, I said. Where do you live? I told him, and he thought that over. I wonder, you're on the river, aren't you? The creek, I mean. Big Bear? It ain't even a creek, I said. Mr. Armbruster laughed. Gandy called it the Big Bear River. That was before he got the Gandy Dam built down below your place. There hasn't been any water in that creek for 50 years, but old Gandy put through an appropriation for I don't know how much money about 10 years ago. He got the dam built by calling the creek a river. What did he want to do that for? I asked. Do you know how much crooked money you can make out of building a dam? Mr. Armbruster asked me. But Gandy's in to stay, I guess. When a man owns the newspapers, he can write his own ticket. Uh-oh, here comes somebody. A man come with keys and took Mr. Armbruster away. After quite a while, somebody else come and let me out. I was took into another room full of lights. Mr. Armbruster was there, and Ma and Pa and Lemuel, and some big fellers with guns. There was a little skinny, wizened man with a bald head and snaky eyes, and everybody done what he told them. They called him Mr. Gandy. This boy's an ordinary hillbilly, Mr. Armbruster said when I come in. If he's got into trouble, it must be by accident. They told him to keep quiet and banged him one, so he kept quiet. That Mr. Gandy sat off in a corner and sort of nodded, looking mean. He had a bad eye. Listen, boy, he said to me, who are you shielding? Who built that uranium pile in your woodshed? You better tell me the truth or you'll get hurt. I just looked at him, so somebody hit me on the top of the head. Shucks, you can't hurt a hog man by hitting him on the head. I recollect the time the feuding Adamses cotched me and banged me on the head till they was plumb wore out, couldn't even squeal when I dumped 'em down a cistern. Mr. Armbruster made noises. Listen, Mr. Gandy, he said, I know it'll make a big story if you find out who built that uranium pile, but you'll get reelected without it. Maybe it isn't a uranium pile anyway. I know who built it, Mr. Gandy said. Renegade scientists or escaped Nazi war criminals, and I intend to find them. Uh-oh, said Mr. Armbruster. Now I get the idea. A story like that would be nationwide, wouldn't it? You could run for governor or the Senate or write your own ticket. What did that boy tell you? Mr. Gandy asked. But Mr. Armbruster said I hadn't told him nothing. Then they started to whoop Lemuel. It was tiresome. Nobody can't wake up Lemuel when he's sot on a nap, and I never seen nobody so sot just then. They give him up for dead after a time. He might as well have been. Lemuel is so bone lazy that when he's sleeping hard, he don't even trouble to breathe. Paul was working magic with them enzyme friends of his, and he was remarkable drunk. It sort of tickled him to get whooped. Every time they whammed him with a length of hose, he giggled kind of foolish. I was ashamed. Nobody tried to whoop Ma. When anybody got close enough to hit her, he'd go all over white as a goose wing and start busting out with sweat and shaking. Once, we knowed a professor feller who said Ma could emit a light beam subsonic. He was a liar. She just made a noise nobody could hear and aimed it wherever she wanted. All them highfalutin words, simple as firing a squirrel rifle. I can do it myself. Mr. Gandy said to take us back to where we was, and he'd see us later. So they drug out Lemuel, and we all went back to our cells. Mr. Armbruster had a lump on his head the size of a duck egg. He lay down on his bunk moaning, and I sat in a corner looking at his head. It sort of shooting a light out of my eyes, only nobody couldn't see the light. What it did was, shucks, I ain't educated. It worked like a poultice, anyhow. After a while, the bump on Mr. Armbruster's head went away, and he stopped groaning. "You're in trouble, Sunk," he said. I'd told him my name by then. "Gandy's got big ideas now, and he's got the people of Piperville hypnotized. What he wants is to hypnotize the state, or even the nation. He wants to be a national figure. The right sort of news story could do that for him. Besides, it would ensure his re-election next week. Not that he needs insurance. He's got the city in his pocket." "Was that a uranium pile?" I just looked at him. "Gandy seems certain," he went on. "He sent up some physicists, and they said it was apparently 235 with the graphite dampers. Sonk, I heard them talking. For your own good, you better not shield anyone. They're going to use a truth drug on you. Sodium pentothal or acopolamine." "You better go to sleep," I said, because I heard Grandpa calling me inside my head. I shut my eyes and listened. 'Twarn't simple, because Pa kept tuning in. Oh, my, he was drunk. "Have a drink," Pa said, cheerful, only without talking, if you understand. "Beshrew thee for a warrantable louse," Grandpa said, much less cheerful. "Get thy dullard mind away from here, Sunk." "Yes, Grandpa," I said, silent-like. "We must make a plan," Pa said. "Have a drink, Sunk." "Now, Pa, do shut up," I told him. "Have some respect for your elders. I mean, Grandpa. Besides, how can I have a drink? You're way off in some other cell." "I got me a pipeline," Pa said. "I can give you a transfusion. Teleportation, that's what it is. I just short-circuit space between your bloodstream and mine, and I can pump alcohol from my veins into yourn. Look, this is how I do it." He showed me how, in a sort of picture inside my head. It looked easy enough. For a hogben, I mean. I got mad. "Pa," I said, "don't make your loving son disrespect you more than natural, you runty old wood shoot you. I know you ain't got no book larnin'. You're just picking them 4-bit words out of somebody's skull." "Have a drink," Pa said, and then yelled. I heard Grandpa chuckle. "Stealing the wisdom from men's minds, eh?" he said. "I, too, can do that. I have just rapidly cultured a migraine virus in my bloodstream and teleported it to your brain, you gore-bellied knave. A plague upon the varlet. Hearken to me, Sunk. Thy rascally sire will not trouble us bewhiles." "Yes, Grandpa," I said. "Are you fit?" "Aye." "And the baby?" "Aye. But you must act. 'Tis your task, Sunk. The trouble lies in that. What is the word? That uranium pile." "So that's what it is," I said. "Who would have thought anyone in the world could recognize it? My own grandsire told me how to make it. They existed in his time." "Indeed. 'Twas through such things that we hogbens became mutants. Faith, I must pick a brain myself to make this clear. There are men in the town where you are, Sunk, who know the words I need. Let me see." He sort of shuffled through a few brains. Then he went on. "When my grandsire lived, men had begun to split the atom. There were, secondary radiations. They affected the genes and chromosomes of some men and women. Dominant mutation with us hogbens. So we are mutants." "That's what Roger Bacon said, wasn't it?" I asked. "Aye, but he was friendly and kept silence. Had men known our powers in those days, we'd have been burned. Even today, it would not be safe for us to reveal ourselves. Eventually, you know what we plan eventually, Sonk." "Yes, Grandpa," I said, for I did know. Well, here's the rub. It seems that men have split the atom again. Thus, they were able to recognize this uranium pile. We must destroy it. We do not want men's eyes upon us. Yet we need power. Not much, but some. The uranium pile was the easiest way to get it, but we cannot use it now. Sonk, here is what you must do, so that enough energy will be supplied for the baby and for me. He told me what to do. Then I went and done it. When I sort of shift my eyes, I can see real purty things. Like them bars on the window, I mean. They get busted up into teeny-weeny little bits, all rushing around like they was crazy. I hear tell them is atoms. My, they look cheerful, all bustling like they was hurrying to get to a meeting on a Sunday. Of course, it's easy to juggle 'em like blocks. You look real hard and make something come out of your eyes, and more teeny little fellers come busting out of your eyes, and they all get together, and it's mighty amusing. I made a mistake the first time and changed them iron bars into gold. Missed an atom, I expect. But after that, I got it right and turned the bars into nothing much. I clomb out and turned them back into iron. First, I'd made sure Mr. Armbruster was asleep. That was easy. We was 7 stories up above the street in a big building that was part the city hall and part jail. It was night time, so nobody noticed me. I flew away. Once an owl came past, figuring I couldn't see in the dark, and I spit on him. Hit him, too. I fixed that there uranium pile. There was guards around it with lights, but I hung up in the sky where they couldn't see me and got busy. First I hotted the thing up so the stuff Mr. Armbruster had called graphite and turned into nothing and blew away. Then it was safe to handle the rest of the junk. 235, is it? And so I did, and I turned that into lead, the real crumbly kind. I made it so fearful crumbly it started to blow away. Soon there was nothing left. Then I flew way up the creek. There was only a dollop of water in it, and Grandpa said he needed more than that. I got way up in the mountains, but didn't have no luck. Grandpa started to talk to me. He said the baby was crying. I guess I shouldn't have tore up the uranium pile till I'd made plumb certain of getting more power. Only thing to do was to make it rain. There are several ways to do that, but I frizz a cloud, sort of. Had to land and build a gadget fast and then fly way up where there was clouds. Well, it took time, but pretty soon there was a thunderstorm coming up, and then it rained. But the water didn't go down the creek. I searched for a while till I found a place where the whole creek bottom had fell out. Seems like there was caves underneath. I did some rapid plugging. No wonder there hadn't been no water to speak of in the creek for so long. I fixed that. Grandpa wanted a steady supply, though, and I smelled around till I located some big springs. I opened them up. By that time, it was raining uncommon rapid. I went back to see Grandpa. Them men who was on guard had gone home, I guess. Grandpa said the baby had plumb upset them when he started crying. They all stuck their fingers in their ears and screamed and run off. I looked over the water wheel like Grandpa told me and done a few repairs. There wasn't much needed. They built pretty good 100 years ago, and the wood had got seasoned, too. I admired that wheel turning and turning as the water piled up in the creek. Creek nothing. It was a river now. But Grandpa said I ought to have seen the Appland way when it was being set up. I fixed him and the baby up nice and comfortable, and then I flew back to Piperville. It was coming on dawn, and I didn't want nobody to see me flying. This time I spit on a pigeon. There was a rumpus going on in the city hall. Seems like Ma and Pa and Lemuel had plumb vanished. There was people running around remarkable upset, and there was great confusion. I knowed what had happened, though. Ma spoke to me in my head and told me to come up to the cell at the end of the block, which was spacious. They was all there. invisible, though. I forgot to say I'd made myself invisible after I'd snuck in, seen Mr. Armbruster was still asleep, and noticed the excitement.
"Grandpa told me what was happening," Ma said. "I figured we'd better stay out and away for a while. Raining hard, ain't it?"
"Sure is," I said. "What's everybody so excited about?"
"They can't figure out what become of us," Ma told me. "Soon as the ruckus quiets down, we'll all go home. You fixed it, I guess."
"I done what Grandpa said," I explained, and then there was sudden yells from down the corridor. Little old fat coon came trundling in, carrying a bundle of sticks. He come right along till he got to the bars in front of where we was. Then he sot himself down and began arranging the sticks to make a fire. He had that dazed look in his eyes, so I knew Lemuel must have hypnotized him. People came crowding around outside. They couldn't see us, naturally, but they were watching that there little old coon. I watched, too, on account of I was never able to figure out how Lemuel could get the critter skun. I seen them build fires before. Lemuel could make 'em do that. But I just never happened to be around when one of his coons stripped down and skun hisself. That I wanted to see. Just before the coon got started, though, a policeman put him in a bag and took him away, so I never did know. It was light by then. I kept hearing bellers from somewheres, and once I heard a voice I knew sing out. "Ma," I said, "that sounds like Mr. Armbruster. I better go see what they're doing to the poor little guy."
"Time we was going home," she said. "We got to dig up Grandpa and the baby. You say the water wheel's turning?"
"Well, yes, Ma," I said. "There's plenty of electric power now." She reached around till she found Pa and whammed him. "Wake up," she said. "Have a drink," Pa said. But she roused him up and said we was going home. Ain't nobody can wake up Lemuel, though. Finally, Ma and Pa took Lemuel between them and flew out through the window after I fixed the bars so they could get through. They stayed invisible on account of there was a crowd down below. It was still raining, but Ma said they weren't made of sugar nor salt, and I'd better come along or I'd get my britches tanned. "Yes, Ma," I said, but I wasn't going to. I stayed behind. I wasn't going to find out what they was doing to Mr. Armbruster. They had him in that big room with the lights on. Mr. Gandy was standing by the window looking real mean. And they had Mr. Armbruster's sleeve rolled up and was going to stick a sort of glass needle into his hide. Well, right away I made myself get visible again. "You better not do that," I said. "It's the Hogben kid," somebody yelled. "Grab him." They grabbed me. I led 'em. Pretty soon I was sitting in a chair with my sleeve rolled up. Mr. Gandy was grinning at me like a wolf. "Use the truth serum on him," he said. "No need to ask that tramp questions now." Kind of dazed, Mr. Armbruster kept saying, "I don't know what happened to Sonk. I wouldn't tell you if I knew." They whammed him. Mr. Gandy stuck his face right into mine. "We'll get the truth about that uranium pile now," he told me. "One shot of this and you'll answer our questions, understand?" So they stuck the needle in my arm and squirted the stuff into me. It tickled. Then they asked me questions. I said I didn't know nothing. Mr. Gandy said to give me another shot. They done it. It tickled worse than ever. Right then, somebody ran into the room and started yelling. "The dam's busted," he bellered. "The Gandy Dam, it's flooded out half the farms in the South Valley." Mr. Gandy reared back and squalled. "You're crazy," he told everybody. "It's impossible. There's been no water in Big Bear River for 100 years. Then they all got together and started whispering, something about samples and a big mob downstairs. "You've got to calm 'em down," somebody told Mr. Gandy. "They're boiling mad. All the crops ruined." "I'll calm 'em down," Mr. Gandy said. "There's no proof, and only a week before election." Well, he rushed out of the room and everybody ran out after him. I got up out of my chair and scratched. That stuff they pumped into me itched fearful inside my skin. I was kind of mad at Mr. Gandy. "Quick," Mr. Armbruster said. "Let's sneak out. Now's our chance." We snuck out the back way. It was easy. We circled around to the front, and there was a big mob standing there in the rain. Up on the courthouse steps was Mr. Gandy, mean as ever, facing a big, husky feller who was waving a chunk of rock. "Every dam has its breaking point," Mr. Gandy said, but the big feller roared and shook the rock over his head. "I know good concrete from bad," he bellowed. "This stuff's all sand. That dam wouldn't hold a gallon of water backed up behind it." Mr. Gandy shook his head. "Outrageous," he said. "I'm just as shocked as you are. Of course, we gave out the contracts in all good faith. If the Ajax Construction Company used shoddy material, we'll certainly sue them." At that point, I got so tired of itching that I decided to do something about it. So I did. The husky feller stepped back a pace and pointed his finger at Mr. Gandy. "Listen," he said. "There's a rumor around you that you own the Ajax Construction Company. Do you?" Mr. Gandy opened his mouth and closed it. He shivered a little. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I own it." You should have heard the roar that went up from that mob. The big feller sort of gasped. "You admit it. Maybe you'll admit that you knew the dam was no good too, huh? How much did you make out of the deal?" $11,000, Mr. Gandy said. "That was net, after I'd paid off the sheriff, the alderman, and—" But at that point the crowd sort of moved up the steps, and there wasn't no more heard from Mr. Gandy. "Well, well," said Mr. Armbruster. "Now I've seen everything. Know what this means, Sonk? Gandy's gone crazy. He must have. But the Reform Administration will go in, they'll throw out all the crooks, and I will have a pleasant life in Piperville once more. Until I move south, that is. Come winter, I always move south. By strange happenstance, I find I have a few coins in my pocket. Will you join me in a drink, Sonk?" "No, thanks," I said. "Ma will be wondering where I got to. Won't there be no more trouble, Mr. Armbruster?" "Well, eventually," he said. "But not for quite a while. They're carrying old Gandy into the jail, see? For his own protection, probably. I must celebrate this, Sonk. Sure you won't? Sonk, where are you?" But I had went invisible. Well, that was all there was to it. I didn't itch no more, so I flew back home and helped rig up the electric current from the water wheel. After a time, the flood died down, but we got a steady flow down the creek thereafter because of the way I'd arranged things upstream. We settled down to the sort of quiet life we hogbens like. It's safest for us. Grandpa said it was quite a flood. It reminded him of something his grandpa had told him. Seems like when Grandpa's grandpa was alive, they had uranium piles and a lot more, and pretty soon the things got out of hand and they had a real flood. Grandpa's grandpa had to move out of the country right fast. Ain't nothing been heard of the place from that day to this. I gather everybody in Atlantis got drowned dead, but they was only foreigners. Mr. Gandy went to jail. Nobody ever knew what made him confess the way he did. Maybe he got an attack of conscience. I don't suppose it could have been because of me. 'Tain't likely. Still, remember that trick Pa showed me about making a short circuit in space and pumping the corn liquor from his blood into mine? Well, I got tired of itching where I couldn't scratch it, so I used that trick myself. That stuff they'd squirted into me was making me itch, whatever it was. I just twisted space around a mite and pumped it right into Mr. Gandy's blood up where he was standing on them courthouse steps. After that, I stopped itching, but Mr. Gandy must have been itching real bad. Served him right, though. Wonder if it could have plumb itched him into telling the truth. See you later. Seemed like some 10 years back, there was a new survey or something, and the way it worked out, through some funny legal business, Yancey had to prove he's got squatters' right on his land. He had to prove it by living there for a year or something. About then, he had an argument with his wife and moved out to the little shack, which was across the property line, and said he was a-gonna let the land go right back to the government, for all he cared, and that'd show the whole family. He knew his wife sought store by her turnip patch and was afraid the government would take it away. The way it turned out, nobody wanted the land anyhow. It was all up and down and had too many rocks in it, but Yancey's wife kept on worriting and begging Yancey to come back, which he was just too mean to do. Yancey Tarbell couldn't have been uncommon comfortable up in that little shack, but he was short-sighted as he was mean. After a spell, Mrs. Tarbell died of being hit on the head with a stone she was throwing up the slope at the shack, and it bounced back at her. So that left only the 8 Tarbell boys and Yancey. He stayed right where he was, though. He might have stayed there till he shriveled up and went to glory, except the Tarbells started feuding with us. We stood it as long as we could on account of they couldn't hurt us. Uncle Les, who was visiting us, got skittery, though, and said he was tired of flying up like a quail 2 or 3 miles in the air every time a gun went off behind a bush. The holes in his hide closed up easy enough, but he said it made him dizzy on account of the air being thinned out that high up. This went on for a while, leastwise, and nobody got hurt, which seemed to rile the 8 Tarbell boys. So one night they all come over in a bunch with their shooting irons and busting their way in. We didn't want no trouble. Uncle Lem, who's Uncle Les's twin, except they were born quite a spell apart. He was asleep for the winter, off in a holler tree somewheres. So he was out of it. But the baby, bless his heart, is getting kind of awkward to shift around, being as how he's 400 years old and big for his age. About 300 pounds, I guess. We could have all hid out or gone down to Piperville in the valley for a mite, but then there was Grandpa in the attic, and I got sort of fond of the little professor feller we keep in a bottle. Didn't want to leave him on account of the bottle might have got smashed in the ruckus if the 8 Tarbell boys was liquored up enough. The professor's cute, even though he never did have much sense. Used to say we was mutants, whatever they are, and kept shooting off his mouth about some people he knowed called chromosomes. Seems like they got mixed up with what the professor called hard radiations, and had some young'uns which was either dominant mutations or HOGBENs, but I always got it mixed up with the Roundhead plot back when we was living in the old country. Of course, I don't mean the real old country. That got sunk. So, seeing as how Grandpa told us to lay low, we waited till the 8 Tarbell boys busted down the door. And then we all went invisible, including the baby. Then we waited for the thing to blow over, only it didn't. After stomping around and ripping up things a lot, the 8 Tarbell boys come down in the cellar. Now that was kind of bad because we was caught by surprise. The baby had gone invisible, like I say, and so had the tank we keep him in, but the tank couldn't move around fast like we could. Well, one of the 8 Tarbell boys went and banged into it and hit himself a smart crack on the shank bone. How he cussed. It was shameful for a growing boy to hear, except Grandpa kin outcuss anybody I ever heard. So I didn't learn nothing. Well, he cussed a lot, jumped around, and all of a sudden his squirrel rifle went off. Must have had a hair trigger. Well, that woke up the baby, who got scared and let out a yell. It was the blamedest yell I ever heard out of the baby yet, and I've seen men go all white and shaky when he bellers. Our professor feller told us once that the baby emitted a subsonic. Imagine. Anyhow, 7 of the 8 Tarbell boys dropped dead. all in a heap without even time to squeal. The eighth one was up at the head of the cellar steps, and he got all quivery and turned around and ran. I guess he was so dizzy he didn't know where he was headed. Before he knowed it, he was up in the attic, where he stepped right square on Grandpa. Now, the fool thing was this. Grandpa was so busy telling us what to do, he'd entirely forgot to go invisible hisself. And I guess one look at Grandpa just plumb finished the eighth Tarbell boy. Well, he fell right down dead, as a skun coon. Can't imagine why, though. I got to admit Grandpa wasn't looking his best that week. He'd been sick. "You all right, Grandpa?" I asked, sort of shaking him out. He cussed me. "'Twarn't my fault," I told him. "'Sblood," he said, mad-like. "What rabble of canting joltheads have I sired? Put me down, you young scoundrel." So I put him back on the gunny sack, and he turned around a couple of times and shut his eyes. After that, he said he was going to take a nap and not to wake him up for nothing, bar Judgment Day. He meant it, too. So we had to figure out for ourselves what was best to do. Ma said it weren't our fault, and all we could do was pile the 8 Tarbell boys in a wheelbarrow and take 'em back home, which I done. Only I got to feeling kind of shy on the way on account of I couldn't figure out no real polite way to mention what had happened. Besides, Ma had told me to break the news gentle. "Even a polecat's got feelings," she said. So I left the wheelbarrow with the 8 Tarbell boys in it behind some scrub brush, and I went on up the slope to where I could see Yancey sitting airing himself out in the sun and reading a book. I still hadn't studied out what to say. I just traipsed along slow-like, whistling Yankee Doodle. Yancey didn't pay me no mind for a while. He's a little mean, dirty man with chin whiskers. Couldn't be much more than 5 feet high. There was tobacco juice on his whiskers, but I might have done old Yancey wrong in figuring he was only sloppy. I heard he used to spit in his beard to draw flies, so he could catch 'em and pull off their wings. Without looking, he picked up a stone and flung it past my head. "Shut up and go away," he said. "Just as you say, Mr. Yancey," I told him, mighty relieved, and started to. But then I remembered Ma would probably whoop me if I didn't mind her orders, so I sort of moved around quiet till I was in back of Yancey and looking over his shoulder at what he was reading. It looked like a book. Then I moved around a mite more till I was upwind of him. Well, he started cackling in his whiskers. "That's a real purty picture, Mr. Yancey," I said. He was giggling so hard it must have cheered him up. "Ain't it, though?" he said, banging his fist on his skinny old rump. My, makes me feel full of ginger just to look at it." It wasn't a book, though. It was a magazine, the kind they sell down at the village, and it was opened at a picture. The feller that made it could draw real good. Not so good as an artist I knowed once over in England. He went by the name of Crookshank or Crookback or something like that, unless I'm mistook. Anyway, this here that Yancey was looking at was quite a picture. It showed a lot of fellers, all exactly alike, coming out of a big machine which I could tell right off wouldn't work, but all these fellers was as like as peas in a pod. Then there was a red critter with bugged-out eyes grabbing a girl. I don't know why. It was sure purty. "Wishing something like that could really happen," Yancey said. "Why, it ain't so hard," I told him. "Only that gadget's all wrong. All you need is a wash basin and some old scrap iron." "Hey?" "That thing there," I said. "The jigger that looks like it's making one feller into a whole lot of fellers. It ain't built right." "I suppose you could do it better," he snapped, sort of mad. "We did once," I said. "I forget what Pa had on his mind, but he owed a man named of Cadmus a little favor. Cadmus wanted a lot of fighting men in a real hurry, so Pa fixed it so Cadmus could split itself up into a passel of soldiers. Shucks, I could do it myself." "What are you blabbering about?" Yancey asked.
You ain't looking at the right thing. This here red critter's what I mean. See what he's a-gonna do? Gonna chaw that there purty gal's head off, looks like. See the tusks on him? Heh. I wished I was a critter like that. I'd chaw up plenty of people. You wouldn't chaw up your own kin, though, I bet, I said, seeing a way to break the news gentle. "'Tain't right to bet," he told me. "Alice, pay your debts. Fear no man and don't lay no wagers. Gambling's a sin. I never made no bets, and I allus paid my debts." But he stopped, scratched his whiskers, and sort of sighed. "All excepting one," he added, frowning. "What was that?" "Oh, I owed a feller something, only I never could locate him afterwards. Must be nigh on 30 years ago. Seems like I got liquored up and got on a train. Guess I robbed somebody, too, 'cause I had a roll big enough to choke a hoss. Never tried that, come to think of it. You keep hosses?" "No, sir," I said. "We was talking about your kin." "Shet up," old Yancey said. "Well, now I have myself quite a time." He licked his whiskers. "Ever heard tell of a place called New York? In some furrin country, I guess. Can't understand a word nobody says. Anyway, that's where I met up with this feller. Often wished I could find him again. An honest man like me hates to think of dying without paying his lawful debts." "Did your 8 boys owe any debts?" I asked. He squinted at me, slapped his skinny leg, and nodded. "Now I know," he said. "Ain't you the Hogben boy?" "That's me, Sonk Hogben." "I heard tell about you Hogbens. All witches, ain't you?" "No, sir." "I heard what I heard. Whole neighborhood's buzzing. Hexers, that's what. You get out of here. Go on, get." "I'm a-goin'," I said. "I just come by to say it's real unfortunate you couldn't chaw up your own kin if you was a critter like in that there picture." "Ain't nobody big enough to stop me." "Maybe not," I said, "but they've all gone to glory." When he heard this, old Yancey started to cackle. Finally, when he got his breath back, he said, "Not them. Them varmints have gone plumb smack to perdition right where they belong. How'd it happen?" "It was sort of an accident," I said. "The baby done kilt 7 of them, and Grandpa kilt the other, in a way of speaking. No harm intended." "No harm done," Yancey said, cackling again. "Ma sent her apologies, and what do you want done with the remains? I got to take the wheelbarrow back home." "Take 'em away. I don't want 'em." "Good riddance to bad rubbish," old Yancey said. So I said all right and started off. But then he yelled out and told me he'd changed his mind. Told me to dump 'em where they was. From what I could make out, which wasn't much 'cause he was laughing so hard, he wanted to come down and kick 'em. So I done like he said and then went back home and told Ma over a mess of catfish and beans and pot liquor. She made some hush puppies, too. They was good. I sot back, figuring I'd earned a rest and thunk a mite, feeling warm and nice round the middle. I was trying to figure what a bean would feel like down in my tummy, but it didn't seem to have no feelings. It couldn't have been more than a half hour later when the pig yelled outside like he was getting kicked, and then somebody knocked on the door. It were Yancey. Minute he come in, he pulled a bandana out of his britches and started sniffing. I looked at Ma, wide-eyed. I couldn't tell her nothing. Pa and Uncle Les was drinking corn in a corner and giggling a mite. I could tell they was feeling good because of the way the table kept rocking. The one between them, it wasn't touching neither one, but it kept jiggling, trying to step fust on Pa's toes and then on Uncle Les's. They was doing it inside their hands, trying to catch the other one off guard. It was up to Ma, and she invited old Yancey to sit down a spell and have some beans. He just sobbed. "Something wrong, neighbor?" Ma asked, polite. "It sure is," Yancey said, sniffling. "I'm a real old man." "You surely are," Ma told him. "Maybe not as old as Sonk here, but you look awful old." "Hey," Yancey said, staring at her. Sonk ain't more than 17, big as he is. Ma near looked embarrassed. Did I say Sonk? She covered up, quick-like. I meant this Sonk's grandpa. His name's Sonk, too. It wasn't, even though Grandpa don't remember what his name was first. It's been so long. But in his time, he's used to a lot of names, like Elijah and so forth. I ain't even sure they had names in Atlantis, where Grandpa come from in the first place. Numbers or something. It don't signify anyhow. Well, seems like old Yancey kept snuffling and groaning and moaning, and made out like we'd killed his 8 boys and he was all alone in the world. He hadn't cared a mite half an hour ago, though, and I said so. But he pointed out he hadn't rightly understood what I was talking about then, and for me to shut up. Ought to had a bigger family, he said. There used to be 2 more boys, Zeb and Robbie, but I shot 'em one time. Didn't like the way they was looking ory-eyed at me. The point is, you hogbens ain't got no right to kill my boys. We didn't go for to do it, Ma said. It was more or less an accident. We'd be right happy to make it up to you, one way or another. That's what I was counting on, old Yancey said. It seems like the least you could do after acting up like you done. It don't matter whether the baby killed my boys, like Sonk says, and he's a liar. The idea is that I figure all you hogbens are responsible, but I guess we could call it square if you did me a little favor. It ain't really right for neighbors to hold bad feelings. Any favor you name, Ma said, if it ain't out of line. 'Tain't much, old Yancey said. I just want you to split me up into a rabble, sort of temporary. Hey, you been listening to Medea? Pa said, being drunk enough not to know no better. Don't you believe her. That was purely a prank she played on Pelias after he got chopped up and he stayed dead. He didn't get young like she said he would. Hey, Yancey said. He pulled that old magazine out of his pocket and it fell open right to that purty picture. This here, he said. Sonk tells me you kin do it, and everybody around here knows you hogbens are witches. Sonk said you done it once with a feller name of Messy. Guess he means Cadmus, I said. Yancey waved the magazine. I saw he had a queer kind of gleam in his eye. It shows right here, he said, wild-like. A feller steps inside this here gimmick, then he keeps coming out of it, dozens of 'em, over and over. Witchcraft. Well, I know about you hogbens. You may fool the city folk, but you don't fool me none. You're all witches. We ain't, Pa said from the corner. Not no more. You are so, Yancey said. I heard stories. I even seen him. He pointed right at Uncle Les. I seen him flying around in the air. And if that ain't witchcraft, I don't know what is. Don't you, honest? I asked. That's easy. It's when you get some... But Ma told me to shut up. Sonk told me you kin do it, he said. And I've been sitting and studying and looking over this here magazine. I got me a fine idea. Now it stands to reason everybody knows a witch kin be in 2 places at the same time. Couldn't a witch maybe get to be in 3 places at the same time? 3's as good as 2, Ma said. Only there ain't no witches. It's like this here science you hear tell about. People make it up out of their heads. It ain't natural. Well then, Yancey said, putting the magazine down. 2 or 3 are a whole passel. How many people are there in the world anyway? 2,150,959,919, I said. Then, hold on a minute, I said. Now, it's 2,150,959,920. Cute little tyke, too. Boy or girl? Ma asked. Boy, I told her. Well, then why can't you make me be in 2 billion, whatever it was, places at the same time? Maybe for just a half a minute or so. I ain't greedy. That'd be long enough anyhow. Long enough for what? Ma asked. Yancey gave me a sly look. I got me a problem, he said. I want to find a feller. Trouble is, I don't know I can find him now. It's been a awful long time, but I got to, somehow or other. I ain't a-gonna rest easy in my grave unless I done paid all my debts. And for 30 years I've been owing this feller something. It lays heavy on my conscience. Well, that's right honorable of you, neighbor, Ma said. Yancey snuffled and wiped his nose on his sleeve. It's a-gonna be a hard job, he said. I put it off maybe a mite too long. The thing is, I was figuring on sending my 8 boys out to look for this feller sometime, so you can see why it's busted me all up. The way them no-good varmints up and got killed without no warning. How am I going to find that feller I want now? Ma looked troubled and passed Yancey the jug. Whoosh, he said after a snort. Tastes like real hellfire for certain. Whoosh. Then he took another swig, sucked in some air, and scowled at Ma. If a man plans on sawing down a tree and his neighbor busts the saw, it seems to me that neighbor ought to lend his own saw. Ain't that right? Sure is, Ma said. Only we ain't got 8 boys to lend you. You got something better, Yancey said. Black wicked magic, that's what. I ain't saying yea or nay about that. It's your own affair. But seeing as how you kilt off them worthless young'uns of mine, so's I can't do like I was intended, why, then it looks like you ought to be willing to help me in some other way. Long as I can locate that feller and pay him what I owe him, I'm satisfied. Now, ain't it the gospel truth that you can split me up into a passel of me critters? Well, I guess we can do that, I suppose, Ma said. And ain't it gospel that you can fix it so's every dang one of them me critters will travel real fast and see everybody in the whole entire world? That's easy, I said. If I can get to do that, Yancey said, it'd be easy for me to spot that feller and give him what he's got coming to him. He snuffled. I allus been honest. I'm scared to dying unless I pay all my debts first. Danged if I want to burn through all eternity like you sinful hogbens are a-gonna. Shucks, Ma said. I guess we can help out, neighbor, being as how you feel so head up about it. Yes, sir, we'll do like you want. Yancey brightened up considerable. Promise? He asked. Swear it on your word and honor? Ma looked kind of funny, but Yancey pulled out his bandana again, so she busted down and made her solemn promise. Right away, Yancey cheered up. How long would the spell take? He asked. There ain't no spell, I said. Like I told you, all I need is some scrap iron and a wash basin. 'Twon't take long. I'll be back real soon, Yancey said, sort of cackling, and run out, laughing his head off. Going through the yard, he kicked out at a chicken, missed, and laughed some more. Guess he was feeling pretty good. You better go on and make that gadget so it'll be ready, Ma told me. Get going. Yes, Ma, I said, but I sat there for a second or two studying. She picked up the broomstick. You know, Ma. Well? Nothing, I said, and dodged the broomstick. I went on out, trying to get clear what was troubling me. Something was, only I couldn't tell what. I felt kind of unwilling to make that there gadget, which didn't make right good sense, since there didn't seem to be nothing really wrong. I went out behind the woodshed, though, and got busy. Took me about 10 minutes, but I didn't hurry much.
Then I come back to the house with the gadget and said I was done. Pa told me to shut up. Well, I sat there and looked at the gimmick and still felt trouble on my mind. Had to do with Yancey, somehow or other. Finally, I noticed he'd left his old magazine behind, so I picked it up and started reading the story right under that picture, trying to make sense out of it. Darned if I could. It was all about some crazy hillbillies who could fly. Well, that ain't no trick. But what I couldn't figure out was whether the fellow that writ it was trying to be funny or not. Seems to me people are funny enough, anyhow, without trying to make 'em funnier. Besides, serious things ought to be treated serious, and from what our professor feller told me once, there's an awful lot of people what really believe in science and take it tremendous serious. He allus got a holy light in his eye when he talked about it. The only good thing about that story, it didn't have no girls in it. Girls make me feel funny. I didn't seem to be getting nowheres, so I went down to the cellar and played with the baby. He's kind of big for his tank these days. He was glad to see me. Winked all four of his eyes at me, one after the other. Real cute. But all the time there was something about that magazine that kept nagging at me. I felt itchy inside, like when before they had that big fire in London some while ago. Quite a spell of sickness they had then, too. It reminded me of something Grandpa had told me once, that he'd got the same sort of skitters just before Atlantis foundered. Of course, Grandpa can sort of look into the future, which ain't much good, really, on account of it keeps changing around. I can't do that myself yet. I ain't growed up enough. But I had a kind of hunch that something real bad was around, only it hadn't happened quite yet. I almost decided to wake up Grandpa. I felt so troubled. But around then I heard tromping upstairs, so I clomb up to the kitchen. There was Yancey swinging down some corn Ma'd give him. Minute I looked at the old coot, I got that feeling again. Yancey said, "Whoosh!" put down the jug, and wanted to know if we was ready. So I pointed at the gadget I'd fixed up and said that was it. All right, and what did he think about it? "That little thing?" Yancey asked. "Ain't you a-going to call up old Scratch?" "Ain't no need," Uncle Les said. "Not with you here, you little water moccasin, you." Yancey looked right pleased. "That's me," he said, "mean as a moccasin and full of peasin'. How does it work?" "Well," I said, "it sort of splits you up into a lot of Yanceys is all." Pa had been sitting quiet, but he must have tuned in inside the head of some professor somewheres on account of he started talking foolish. Well, he don't know any 4-bit words hisself. I wouldn't care to know 'em myself, being as how they only mix up what's simple as cleaning a trout. "Each human organism," Pa said, showing off like crazy, "is an electromagnetic machine emitting a pattern of radiations both from brain and body. By reversing polarity, each unit of you, Yancey, will be automatically attracted to each already existent human unit, since unlikes attract. But first, you will step on Sonk's device, and your body will be broken down." "Hey!" Yancey yelped. Pa went right on, proud as a peacock. "Into a basic electronic matrix, which can then be duplicated to the point of infinity, just as a typeface may print millions of identical copies of itself in reverse, negative instead of positive. Since space is no factor where electronic wave patterns are concerned, each copy will be instantly attracted to the space occupied by every other person in the world." Pa was going on till I liked to bust. "But since two objects cannot occupy the same space-time, well, there will be an automatic spatial displacement, and each Yancey copy will be repelled to approximately 2 feet away from each human being." "You forgot to draw a pentagram," Yancey said, looking around nervous-like. "But that's the awfulest darn spell I ever heard in all my born days. I thought you said you wasn't going to call up old Scratch."
Maybe it was on account of Yancey was looking uncommon like Old Scratch hisself just then, but I just couldn't stand it no longer, having this funny feeling inside me. So I woke up Grandpa. I did it inside my head, the baby helping, so nobody noticed. Right away, there was a stirring in the attic, and Grandpa heaved himself around a little and woke up. Next thing I knew, he was cussing a blue streak. Well, the whole family heard that, even though Yancey couldn't. Pa stopped showing off and shut up. "Dullards," Grandpa said, real mad. "Rapscallions. Certes, he wished it was no wonder I's having bad dreams. Sonk, you've put your foot in it now. Have you no sense of process? Didn't you realize what this caitiff schmo was planning, the stinkard? Get in the groove, Sonk, ere manhood's state shall find thee unprepared." Then he added something in Sanskrit. Living as long as Grandpa has, he gets mixed up in his talk sometimes. "Now, Grandpa," Ma thunk, "what's Sonk been and done?" "You've all done it," Grandpa yelled. "Couldn't you add cause and effect? Sonk, what of the picture you wrought in Yancey's pulp mag? Wherefore his sodine charge of Herte, when obviously the stinkard hath no more honor than a lounge lizard? Do you want the world depopulated before its time? Ask Yancey what he's got in his breeches pocket, dang you." "Mr. Yancey," I said, "what have you got in your breeches pocket?" "Hey," he said, reaching down and hauling out a big rusty monkey wrench. "You mean this? I picked it up back of the shed." Well, he was looking real sly. "What you aiming to do with that?" Ma asked, quick. "Yancey, give us all a mean look." "Ain't no harm telling you," he said. "I aim to hit everybody, every darn soul in the whole entire world, right smack on top of the head, and you promised to help me do it." "Lawks a mercy," Ma said. "Yes, sirree," Yancey giggled. "When you hex me, I'm a-going to be in every place everybody else is, standing right behind 'em. I'll whang 'em good. That-a-way I can be sure I'll get even. One of them people is just bound to be the feller I want, and he'll get what I've been owing him for 30 years. "What feller?" I said. "You mean the one you met up with in New York you was telling me about? I figured you just owed him some money." "Never said no such thing," Yancey snapped. "A debt's a debt, be it money or a bust in the head. Ain't nobody gonna step on my corn and get away with it 30 years or no 30 years. "He stepped on your corn?" Pa asked. "That's all he done?" "Yup. I was liquored up at the time, but I recollect I went down some stairs to where a lot of trains was rushing around under the ground." "You was drunk," Pa chimed in. "Why, I sure was," Yancey said. "Couldn't be no such thing, trains running underground, but I sure as shootin' wasn't dreaming about that feller what stepped on my corn. Why, I can still feel it. I got mad. It was so crowded I couldn't even move for a mite, and I never even got a good look at the feller what stepped on me. By the time I hit out with my stick, he must have got away. Never knew what he looked like. Might have been a female, but that don't signify. I just ain't going to die till I pay my debts and get even with everybody what ever done me dirt. I Alice got even with every dang soul what done me wrong, and most everybody I ever met did." Riled up a whole lot was Yancey Tarbell. He went right on from there. "So I figured since I never found out just who this feller was what stepped on my corn, I better make downright sure and take a lick at everybody, man, woman, and child." "Now, you hold your hosses," I said. "Ain't no children could have been alive 30 years ago, and you know it." "Makes no difference," Yancey snapped. "I was thinking, and I got an awful idea. Suppose that feller went and died. 30 years is a long time. But then I figured, even if he did up and die, chances are he got married and had kids first. If and I can't get even with him, I can get even with his children. The sins of the father, that's scripture. If and I hit everybody in the world, I can't go for wrong. You ain't hitting no hogbens, Ma said. None of us been in New York since afore you was born. I mean, we ain't never been there, so you can just leave us out of it. How'd you like to get $1 million instead? Or maybe you want to get young again or something like that. We can fix that for you instead if you'll give up this here wicked idea. I ain't a-gonna, Yancey said, stubborn. You give your gospel word to help me. Well, we ain't bound to keep a promise like that, Ma said. But then Grandpa chimed in from the attic. The Hogben word is sacred, he told us. It's our bond. We must keep our promise to this booby, but having kept it, we are not bound farther. Oh, I said, sort of getting a thought. That being the case, Mr. Yancey, just what did we promise, exact? He waved the monkey wrench at me. I'm going to get split up into as many people as there are people in the world, and I'm going to be standing right beside all of them. You give your word to help me do that. Don't you try to wiggle out of it. I ain't wiggling, I said. Only we better get it clear so you'll be satisfied and won't have no kick coming. One thing, though, you got to be the same size as everybody you visit. Hey, I can fix it easy. When you step on this here gadget, there'll be 2,150,959,920 Yanceys all over the world. Supposing now one of these here Yanceys finds himself standing next to a big feller 7 feet tall. Well, that wouldn't be so good, would it? I want to be 8 feet high, Yancey said. No, sir. The Yancey who goes to visit a fellow that high is going to be just that high himself. Exactly. And the one who visits a baby only 2 feet high is going to be only 2 feet high himself. What's fair's fair. You agree to that or it's all off. Only other thing, you'll be just exactly as strong as the feller you up again. I guess he seen I was firm. He hefted the monkey wrench. How'll I get back? He asked. We'll take care of that, I said. I'll give you 5 seconds. That's long enough to swing a monkey wrench, ain't it? Well, it ain't very long. If you stay longer, somebody might hit back. So they might, he said, turning pale under the dirt. 5 seconds is plenty. Then, if we do just that, you'll be satisfied? You won't have no kick coming? He swung the monkey wrench and laughed. Suits me fine and dandy, he said. I'll bust their heads good, he he he. Then you step right on here, I said, showing him. Wait a mite, though. I better try it first, to make sure it works right. I picked up a stick of firewood from the box by stone and winked at Yancey. You get set, I said. The minute I get back, you step right on here. Ma started to say something, but all of a sudden Grandpa started laughing in the attic. I guess he was looking into the future again. I stepped on the gadget, and it worked slick as anything. Before I could blink, I was split up into 2,150,959,919 sonk hogbens. There was one short, of course, on account I left out Yancey. And, of course, the hogbens ain't listed in no census. But here I was, standing right in front of everybody in the whole entire world, except the Hogben family and Yancey hisself. I was plumb unreasonable. Never did I know there was so many faces in the world. They was all colors, some with whiskers, some without, some with clothes on, some naked as needles, some awful big and some real short. Half of them was in daylight and half was in the nighttime. I got downright dizzy. For just a flash, I thought I could make out some of the people I'd knowed down in Piperville, including the sheriff, but he got mixed up with a lady in a string of beads who was chasing a kangaroo critter, and she turned into a man dressed up fit to kill who was speechifying in a big room somewheres. I was dizzy. I got a hold of myself, and it was about time, too, for just about then near everybody in the whole world noticed me. Of course, it must have looked like I'd popped out of thin air right in front of them, real sudden. And, well, you had near 2,150,959,919 people looking you right square in the eye. It's just awful. I forgot what I'd been intending. Only I sort of heard Grandpa's voice telling me to hurry up. So I pushed that stick of firewood I was holding, only now it was 2,150,959,919 sticks into just about the same number of hands, and let it go. Some of the people let go too, but most of them held on to it. Then I tried to remember the speech I was going to make, telling him to get in the first lick at Yancey afore he could swing that monkey wrench. But I was too confounded. It was funny. Having all them people looking right at me made me so downright shy. I couldn't even open my mouth. What made it worse was that Grandpa yelled I had only 1 second left, so there wasn't even time to make a speech. In just 1 second, I was going to flash back to our kitchen. And then old Yancey was all ready to jump in the gadget and swing that monkey wrench. And I hadn't warned nobody. All I'd done was give everybody a little old stick of firewood. How they stared. I felt plumb naked, their eyes bugged right out. And just as I started to thin out around the edges like a biscuit, I don't know what come over me. I guess it was feeling so uncommon shy. Maybe I shouldn't have done it, but I'd done it. Then I was back in the kitchen. Grandpa was laughing fit to kill in the attic. The old gentleman's got a funny kind of sense of humor, I guess. I didn't have no time for him then, though, for Yancey jumped past me and into the gadget, and he disappeared into thin air the way I had, split up like I'd been into as many people as there was in the world, standing right in front of him. Ma and Pa and Uncle Les was looking at me real hard. I sort of shuffled. "I fixed it," I said. "Seems like a man who's mean enough to hit little babies over the head deserves what he's—" I stopped and looked at the gadget. "What he's been and got," I finished, on account of Yancey had tumbled out of thin air and a more whooped-up old rattlesnake I never seen. Well, I guess pretty near everybody in the whole world had took a whang at Mr. Yancey. He never even had a chance to swing that monkey wrench. The whole world had got in the first lick. Yes, sirree, Mr. Yancey looked plumb ruined. But he could still yell. You could have heard him a mile off. He kept screaming that he'd been cheated. He wanted another chance, and this time he was taking his shooting iron and a bowie knife. Finally, Ma got disgusted, took him by the collar, and shook him up till his teeth rattled. "Quoting scripture," she said, mad-like. "You little dried-up scraggle of downright peasin'. The good book says an eye for an eye, don't it? We keep our word, and there ain't nobody can say different." "That's the truth, certes," Grandpa chimed in from the attic. "You better go home and get some arnesty," Ma said, shaking Yancey some more. "And don't you come round here no more. Never again, or we'll set the baby on you." "But I didn't get even," Yancey squalled. "I guess you ain't a-gonna ever," I said. "You just can't live long enough to get even with everybody in the whole world, Mr. Yancey." By and by, that seemed to strike Yancey all in a heap. He turned a rich color like beet soup, made a quacking noise, and started cussing. Uncle Les reached for the poker, but there wasn't no need. "The whole dang world done me wrong," Yancey squealed and clapped his hands to his head. "I been flummoxed. Why in tarnation did they hit me first? There's something funny about—" "Hush up," I said, all of a sudden realizing the trouble wasn't over like I'd thought. "Listen, anybody hear anything from the village?" Even Yancey shut up whilst we listened. "Don't hear a thing," Ma said. "Sonk's right," Grandpa put in. "That's what's wrong." Then, well, everybody got it. That is, everybody except Yancey. 'Cause about now there ought to have been quite a rumpus down at Piperville. Don't forget me and Yancey went visiting the whole world, which includes Piperville, and people don't take a thing like that quiet. There ought to have been some yelling going on at least. "What are you all standing round dumb as mutes for?" Yancey busted out. "You got to help me get even." I didn't pay him no mind. I sat down and studied the gadget. After a minute, I seen what it was I'd done wrong. I guess Grandpa seen it about as quick as I did. You ought to heard him laugh. I hope it done the old gentleman good. He has a right peculiar sense of humor sometimes. "I sort of made a mistake in this gadget, Ma," I said. "Well, that's why it's so quiet down in Piperville." "Aye, by my troth," Grandpa said, still laughing. "Sonk had best seek cover. 23 skidoo, kid." "You done something you shouldn't, Sonk," Ma said. "Blabber, blabber, blabber," Yancey yelled. "I want my rights. I want to know what it was Sonk done that made everybody in the world hit me over the head. He must have done something. I never had no time to—" "Now, you leave the boy alone, Mr. Yancey," Ma said. "We done what we promised, and that's enough. You get out of here and simmer down before you say something you regret." Pa winked at Uncle Les, and before Yancey could yell back at Ma, the table sort of bent its legs down like they had knees in 'em and snuck up behind Yancey real quiet. Then Pa said to Uncle Les, "All together now, let her go." And the table straightened up its legs and gave Yancey a terrible bunt that sent him flying out the door. Last we heard of Yancey was the whoops he kept letting out whenever he hit the ground all the way down the hill. He rolled halfway to Piperville, I found out later. And when he got there, he started hitting people over the head with his monkey wrench. I guess he figured he might as well make a start the hard way. They put him in jail for a spell to cool off, and I guess he did, because afterward he went back to that little shack of his, and I hear he don't do nothing but sit around with his lips moving, trying to figure a way to get even with the whole world. I don't calculate he'll ever hit on it, though. At that time, I wasn't paying him much mind. I had my own troubles. As soon as Pa and Uncle Les got the table back in place, Ma lit into me again. "Tell me what happened, Sonk," she said. "I'm afeard you done something wrong when you was in that gadget. Remember, you're a Hogben son. You got to behave right when the whole world's looking at you. You didn't go and disgrace us in front of the entire human race, did you, Sonk?" Grandpa laughed again. "Not yet, he hasn't," he said. Then, down in the basement, I heard the baby give a kind of gurgle, and I knowed he could see it too. That's surprising, kinda. We never know for sure about the baby. I guess he really can see a little bit into the future, too. "I just made a little mistake, Ma," I said. "Could happen to anybody. It seems the way I fixed that gadget up, it split me into a lot of songs. All right, but it sent me ahead into next week, too. That's why there ain't no ruckus yet down in Piperville." "My land," Ma said. "Child, you do things so careless." "I'm sorry, Ma," I said. "Trouble is, too many people in Piperville know me. I'd better light out for the woods and pick me a nice holler tree. I'll be needing it come next week." "Sonk," Ma said, "you been up to something. Sooner or later I'll find out, so you might as well tell me now." Well, shucks, I knowed she was right. So I told her, and I might as well tell you, too. You'll find out anyhow come next week. It just shows you can't be too careful. This day, week, everybody in the whole world is a-gonna be mighty surprised When I show up out of thin air, hand 'em all a stick of firewood, and then roar back and spit right smack in their eye. I suppose that their 2,150,959,919 includes everybody on Earth. Everybody. Sometime next week, I figure. See you later. Cold War. Chapter 1. Last of the Pews. I'll never have a cold in the head again without I think a little Junior Pew. Now there was a repulsive brat if ever I saw one. Built like a little gorilla, he was. Fat, pasty face, mean look, eyes so close together you could poke 'em both out at once with one finger. His pa thought the world of him, though. Maybe that was natural, seeing as how little Junior was the image of his pappy. The last of the Pews, the old man used to say, sticking his chest out and beaming down at the little gorilla. Finest little lad that ever stepped. It made my blood run cold sometimes to look at the two of 'em together. Kind of sad now to think back to those happy days when I didn't know either of 'em. You may not believe it, but them two Pews, father and son, between 'em came within that much of conquering the world. Us Hogbens is quiet folks. We like to keep our heads down and lead quiet lives in our own little valley where nobody comes near withouten we say so. Our neighbors and the folks in the village are used to us by now. They know we try hard not to act conspicuous. They make allowances. If Pa gets drunk, like last week, and flies down the middle of Main Street in his red underwear, most people make out they don't notice, so's not to embarrass Ma. They know he'd walk like a decent Christian if he was sober. The thing that drove Pa to drink that time was little Sam, which is our baby we keep in a tank down cellar, starting in to teeth again. First time since the war between the states. We figured he was through teething, but with little Sam, you can never tell. He was mighty restless, too. A professor we keep in a bottle told us once little Sam emitted subsonic somethings when he yells, but that's just his way of talking. Don't mean a thing. It makes your nerves twiddle, that's all. Pa can't stand it. This time it even woke up Grandpa in the attic, and he hadn't stirred since Christmas. First thing after he got his eyes open, he bust out madder than a wet hen at Pa. "I see ye, wit old knave that ye are," he howled. "Flyin' again, is it? Oh, sick a real fool sickte. I'll ground ye wis." There was a far-away thump. "You made me fall a good 10 feet," Pa hollered from away down the valley. "It ain't fair. I could have busted something." "You bust us all with your drunken carelessness," Grandpa said. "Flying in full sight of the neighbors. People get burned at the stake for less. You want mankind to find out all about us? Now shut up and let me tend to baby." Grandpa can always quiet the baby if nobody else can. This time he sung him a little song in Sanskrit, and after a bit they was snoring a duet. I was fixing up a dingus for Ma to sour up some cream for sour cream biscuits. I didn't have much time to work with but an old sled, some pieces of wire, but I didn't need much. I was trying to point the top end of the wire north-northeast when I seen a pair of checked pants rush by in the woods. It was Uncle Lem. I could hear him thinking, "It ain't me," he was saying real loud inside his head. "Get back to your work, Sonk. It ain't within a mile of you. Your Uncle Lem's a fine old feller and never tells lies. Think I'd fool ye, Sonky boy?" "You sure would," I thunk back. "If you could. What's up, Uncle Lem?" At that he slowed down and started to saunter back in a wide circle. "Oh, I just had an idea Ma might like a mess of blackberries," he thunk, kicking a pebble very nonchalant. "If anybody asks, you say you ain't seen me. It's no lie, you ain't." Uncle Lem, I thunk real loud, I gave Ma my bounden word I wouldn't let you out of range without me along, account of the last time you got away. Now, my boy, Uncle Lem thunk fast, let bygones be bygones. Well, you just can't say no to a friend, Uncle Lem, I reminded him, taking a last turn of the wire around the runner. So you wait a shake till I get this cream soured, and we'll both go together, wherever it is you have in mind. I saw the checked pants among the bushes, and he come out in the open and give me a guilty smile. Uncle Lem's a fat little feller. He means well, I guess, but he can't be talked into most anything by most anybody, which is why we have to keep a close eye on him. How you going to do it? He asked me, looking at the cream jug. Make the little critters work faster? Uncle Lem, I said, you know better than that. Cruelty to dumb animals is something I can't abide. Them there little critters work hard enough souring milk the way it is. They're such teensy-weensy fellers, I kind of feel sorry for 'em. Why, you can't even see 'em without you go kind of cross-eyed when you look. Pa says they're enzymes, but they can't be. They're too teeny. Teeny is as teeny does, Uncle Lem said. How you going to do it, then? Well, this here gadget, I told him, kind of proud. We'll send Ma's cream jug ahead into next week sometime. Well, this weather don't take cream more than a couple of days, but I'm giving it plenty of time. When I bring it back, bingo, it's sour. I set the jug on the sled. I never seen such a do-last brat, Uncle Lem said, stepping forward and bending a wire crosswise. You better do it that way on account of the thunderstorm next Tuesday. All right now, shooty off. So I shot her off. When she come back, sure enough, the cream was sour enough to walk a mouse. Crawling up the can, there was a hornet from next week, which I squashed. Now that was a mistake. I knowed it the minute I touched the jug. Dang Uncle Lem, anyhow. He jumped back into the underbrush, squealing real happy. Fooled you that time, you young stinker, he yelled back. Let's see you get your thumb out of the middle of next week. It was the time lag done it. I might have knowed. When he crossed that wire, he didn't have no thunderstorm in mind at all. Took me nigh unto 10 minutes to work myself loose, account of some feller called inertia, who mixes in if you ain't careful when you fiddle around with time. I don't understand much about it myself. I ain't got my growth yet. Uncle Lem says he's already forgot more than I'll ever know. With that head start, I almost lost him. Didn't even have time to change into my store-bought clothes, and I knowed by the way he was all dressed up, fit to kill, he was headed for somewheres fancy. He was worried, too. I kept running into little stray worrisome thoughts he'd left behind him, hanging like teeny little mites of clouds on the bushes. Couldn't make out much on account of they was shredding away by the time I got there, but he'd sure done something he shouldn't have. That much anybody could have told. They went something like this. Worry, wish I hadn't done it. Oh, heaven help me if Grandpa ever finds out. Oh, them nasty pews. How could have been such a fool? Worry, poor old feller, such a good soul, too. Never done nobody no harm, and look at me now. That sonk, too big for his britches, teach him a thing or two, ha ha. Oh, worry, never mind, brace up, you good old boy, everything's bound to turn out right in the end. You deserve the best, bless you, Lemuel. Grandpa'll never find out. Well, I seen his checkered britches hightailing through the woods after a bit, but I didn't catch up to him till he was down the hill, across the picnic grounds at the edge of town, and pounding on the sill of the ticket window at the railroad station with a Spanish doubloon he snitched from Paul's sea chest. It didn't surprise me none to hear him asking for a ticket to State Center. I let him think I hadn't caught up. He argued something terrible with the man behind the window, but finally he dug down in his britches and fetched up a silver dollar, and the man calmed down.
The train was already puffing up smoke behind the station when Uncle Lem darted round the corner. Didn't leave me much time, but I made it too, just. I had to fly a little over the last half dozen yards, but I don't think anybody noticed. Once, when I was just a little shaver, there was a great plague in London, where we were living at the time, and all us hogbens had to clear out. I remember the hullabaloo in the city, but looking back now, it don't seem a patch on the hullabaloo in State Center Station when the train pulled in. Times have changed, I guess. Whistles blowing, horns honking, radios yelling bloody murder. Seems like every invention the last 200 years has been noisier than the one before it. Made my head ache till I fixed up something Paul once called a raised decibel threshold, which was pure showing off. Uncle Lem didn't know I was anywhere around. I took care to think real quiet, but he was so wrapped up in his worries he wasn't paying no mind to nothing. I followed him through the crowds in the station out onto a wide street full of traffic. It was a relief to get away from the trains. I always hate to think what's going on inside the boiler with all the little bitty critters so small you can't hardly see 'em, poor things, flying around all hot and excited and bashing their heads together. It seems plumb pitiable. Of course, it just don't do to think what's happening inside the automobiles that go by. Uncle Lem knowed right where he was headed, but he took off down the street so fast I had to keep reminding myself not to fly, trying to keep up. I kept thinking I ought to get in touch with the folks at home in case this turned into something I couldn't handle, but I was plumb stopped everywhere I turned. Ma was at the church sociable that afternoon, and she whopped me the last time I spoke to her out of thin air right in front of the Reverend Jones. He ain't used to us hogbens yet. Pa was dead drunk. No good trying to wake him up, and I was scared to death I would wake the baby if I tried to call on Grandpa. Uncle Lem scuttled right along, his checkered legs a-twinkling. Well, he was worrying at the top of his mind, too. He'd caught sight of a crowd in a side street gathered around a big truck, looking up at a man standing on it and waving bottles in both hands. He seemed to be making a speech about headaches. I could hear him all the way to the corner. There was big banners tacked along the sides of the truck that said, "Pew Headache Cure." "Oh, worry, worry," Uncle Lem thunk. "Oh, bless my toes, what am I going to do? I never dreamed anybody'd marry Lily Lou Mutz. Oh, worry." Well, I reckon we'd all been surprised when Lily Lou Mutz up and got herself a husband a while back, round 10 years ago, I figured. But what it had to do with Uncle Lem, I couldn't think. Lily Lou was just about the ugliest female that ever walked. Ugly ain't no word for her, poor gal. Grandpa said once she put him in mind of a family name of Gorgon he used to know. Not that she wasn't a good-hearted critter. Being so ugly, she put up with a lot in the way of rough acting up from the folks in the village, riff-raff lot, I mean. She lived by herself in a little shack up the mountain, and she must have been close on to 40 when some feller from the other side of the river come along one day and rocked the whole valley right back on its heels by asking her to marry up with him. Never saw the feller myself, but I heard tell he wasn't no beauty prize winner neither. Come to think of it, I told myself right then, looking at the truck, come to think of it, feller's name was Pew. Chapter 2. A Fine Old Feller. Next thing I knowed, Uncle Lem had spotted somebody under a lamppost on the sidewalk at the edge of the crowd, but he trotted over. It seemed to be a big gorilla and a little gorilla standing there watching the feller on the truck selling bottles with both hands. "Come and get it," he was yelling. "Come and get your bottle of Pew's old reliable headache cure while they last." "Well, Pew, here I am," Uncle Lem said, looking up at the big gorilla. "Hello, Junior," he said right afterward, glancing down at the little gorilla. I seen him shudder a little. You sure couldn't blame him for that. Two nastier specimens of the human race I never did see in all my born days.
If they hadn't been quite so pasty-faced or just the least mite slimmer, maybe they wouldn't have put me so much in mind of two well-fed slugs, one growed up and one baby-sized. The paw was all dressed up in a Sunday meeting suit with a big gold watch chain across his front, and the way he strutted you'd have thought he'd never had a good look in a mirror. "Howdy, Lem," he said, casual-like. "Right on time, I see. Junior, say howdy to Mr. Lem Hogben. You owe Mr. Hogben a lot, sonny." And he laughed a mighty nasty laugh. Junior paid him no mind. He had his beady little eyes fixed on the crowd across the street. Well, he looked about 7 years old and mean as they come. "Shall I do it now, Pa?" he asked in a squeaky voice. "Can I let him have it now, Pa? Huh, Pa?" From the tone he used, I looked to see if he'd got a machine gun handy. I didn't see none, but if looks was ever mean enough to kill, Junior Pugh could have mowed the crowd right down. "Manly little feller, ain't he, Lem?" Pa Pugh said, real smug. "I tell you, I'm mighty proud of this youngster. Wish his dear old grandpa could have lived to see him. A fine old family line, the Pughs is. Nothing like it anywhere. Only trouble is, Junior's the last of his race. You see why I got in touch with you, Lem." Uncle Lem shuddered again. "Yep," he said. "I see all right, but you're wasting your breath, Pugh. I ain't gonna do it." Young Pugh spun around in his tracks. "Shall I let him have it, Pa?" he squeaked, real eager. "Shall I, Pa? Now, Pa? Huh?" "Shut up, sonny," the big feller said, and he whammed the little feller across the side of the head. Pugh's hands was like hams. He sure was built like a gorilla. The way his great big arms swung down from them big hunched shoulders, you'd have thought the kid would go flying across the street when his paw whopped him one. But he was a burly little feller. He just staggered a mite and then shook his head and went red in the face. He yelled out loud and squeaky, "Pa, I warned you. The last time you whammed me, I warned you. Now I'm going to let you have it." He drew a deep breath, and his two little teeny eyes got so bright I could have sworn they was going to touch each other across the middle of his nose. His pasty face got bright red. "Okay, Junior," Pa Pugh said, real hasty. "The crowd's ready for you. Don't waste your strength on me, sonny. Let the crowd have it." Now, all this time I was standing at the edge of the crowd listening and watching. Uncle Lem. But just then somebody jiggled my arm and a thin kind of voice said to me, real polite, "Excuse me, but may I ask a question?" I looked down. It was a skinny man with a kind-hearted face. He had a notebook in his hand. "Well, it's all right with me," I told him, polite. "Ask away, mister." "I just wondered how you feel, that's all," the skinny man said, holding his pencil over the notebook, ready to write down something. "Why, pert," I said. "Right kind of you to inquire. Hope you're feeling well, too, mister." He shook his head, kind of dazed. "That's the trouble," he said. "I just don't understand it. I feel fine." "Why not?" I asked. "Fine day. Everybody here feels fine." He went right on, just like I hadn't spoke. "Barring normal odds, everybody's in average good health in this crowd, but in about 5 minutes or less, as I figure it," he looked at his wristwatch. Just then, somebody hit me right on top of the head with a red-hot sledgehammer. Now, you sure can't hurt a hogben by hitting him on the head. Anybody's a fool to try. I felt my knees buckle a little, but I was all right in a couple of seconds, and I looked around to see who'd whammed me. Wasn't a soul there, but oh my, the moaning and groaning that was going up from that there crowd. People was a-clutching at their foreheads and a-staggering around the street, clawing at each other to get to that truck where the man was handing out the bottles of headache cure as fast as he could take in the dollar bills. The skinny man with the kind face rolled up his eyes like a duck in thunder. "Oh, my head," he groaned. "What did I tell you? Oh, my head." Then he sort of tottered away, fishing in his pocket for money. Well, the family always did say I was slow-witted, but you'd have to be downright feeble-minded if you didn't know there was something mighty peculiar going on around here. I'm no ninny, no matter what Ma says. I turned around and looked for Junior Pugh. There he stood, the fat-faced little varmint, red as a turkey gobbler, all swole up, and his mean little eyes just a-flashing at the crowd. It's a hex, I thought to myself, perfectly calm. I'd never believed it, but it's a real hex. Now how in the world... Then I remembered Lily Lou Mutz and what Uncle Lem had been thinking to himself, and I began to see the light. The crowd had gone plumb crazy, fighting to get at the headache cure. I pretty near had to bash away my way over towards Uncle Lem. I figured it was past time I took a hand, on account of him being so soft in the heart and likewise just about as soft in the head. "No, sirree," he was saying, firm-like. "I won't do it. Not by no manner of means I won't." "Uncle Lem," I said. I bet he jumped a yard into the air. "Sonk!" he squeaked. He flushed up and grinned sheepish, and then he looked mad, but I could tell he was kind of relieved, too. "I told you not to foller me," he said. "Ma told me not to let you out of my sight," I said. "I promise Ma and us Hogbens never break a promise. What's going on here, Uncle Lem?" "Oh, Sonk, everything's gone dead wrong," Uncle Lem wailed out. "Here I am with a heart of gold, and I'd just as soon be dead. Meet Mr. Ed Pugh, Sonk. He's trying to get me kilt." "Now, Lem," Ed Pugh said, "you know that ain't so. I just want my rights, that's all. Pleased to meet you, young fella. Another Hogben, I take it. Maybe you can talk to your uncle into—" "Excuse me for interrupting, Mr. Q," I said, real polite, "but maybe you'd better explain. All this is purely a mystery to me." He cleared his throat and threw his chest out, important-like. I could tell this was something he liked to talk about. Made him feel pretty big, I could see. "I don't know if you was acquainted with my dear departed wife, Lily Lou Mutz, that was," he said. "This here's our little child, Junior. A fine little lad he is, too. What a pity we didn't have 8 or 10 more just like him." He sighed real deep. "Well, that's life. I'd hoped to marry young and be blessed with a whole passel of young'uns, being as how I'm the last of a fine old line. I don't mean to let it die out, neither." Here he gave Uncle Lem a mean look. Uncle Lem sort of whimpered. "I ain't going to do it," he said. "You can't make me do it." "We'll see about that," Ed Pugh said, threatening. "Maybe your young relative here will be more reasonable. I'll have you know I'm getting to be a power in this state, and what I says goes." "Pa," little Junior squeaked out just then, "Pa, they're kind of slowing down." "Can I give it to 'em double strength this time, Pa? Betcha I could kill a few if I let myself go. Hey, Pa." Ed Pugh made as if he was going to clonk the little varmint again, but I guess he thought better of it. "Don't interrupt your elders, Sonny," he said. "Pa's busy. Just tend to your job and shut up." Well, he glanced out over the moaning crowd. "Give that bunch over beyond the truck a little more treatment," he said. "They ain't buying fast enough. But no double strength, Junior. You gotta save your energy. You're a growing boy." He turned back to me. "Junior's a talented child," he said, very proud. "As you can see, he inherited it from his dear dead-and-gone mother, Lily Lou. I was telling you about Lily Lou. It was my hope to marry young, like I said, but the way things worked out, somehow I just didn't get around to wifing till I'd got well along into the prime of life." He blew out his chest like a toad frog, looking down admiring. I never did see a man that thought better of himself. "Never found a woman who'd never found the right woman," he went on, "till the day I met Lily Lou Mutz." "I know what you mean," I said, polite. I did, too. He must have searched a long, long ways 'fore he found somebody ugly enough herself to look twice at him. Even Lily Lou, poor soul, must have thunk a long time 'fore she said yes. And that, Ed Pugh went on, is where your Uncle Em comes in. It seems like he'd give Lily Lou a bewitchment quite some while back. I never, Uncle Em squealed. And anyway, how I know she'd get married and pass it on her child? Who'd ever think Lily Lou would... He gave her a bewitchment. Ed Pugh went right on talking. Only she never told me she was a-layin' on her deathbed a year ago. Lordy, I sure would have whooped her good if I'd knowed how she held out on me all them years. It was the hex Lemuel gave her, and she inherited it on to her little child. I only done it to protect her, Uncle Lem said, right quick. You know I'm speaking the truth, sonk boy. Poor Lily Lou was so pizen ugly people used to up and heave a clod at her now and then before they could help themselves. Just automatic like. Couldn't blame 'em. I often fought down the impulse myself. But poor Lily Lou, I sure felt sorry for her. You'll never know how long I fought down my good impulses, sonk. But my heart of gold does get me into messes. One day I felt so sorry for the poor hideous critter I gave her the hex power. Anybody'd have done the same, sonk. How'd you do it? I asked, real interested, thinking it might come in handy someday to know. I'm young yet, and I got lots to learn. Well, he started to tell me, and it was kind of mixed up. Right at first, I got a notion some furrin feller named Gene Chromosome had done it for him, and after I got straight on that part, he'd gone cantering off into a rigmarole about the alpha waves of the brain. Shucks, I'd knowed that much my own self. Everybody must have noticed the way them little waves go a-sweeping over the tops of people's heads when they're thinking. I watched Grandpa sometimes when he had as many as 600 different thoughts following each other up and down them little paths where his brain is. Hurts my eyes to look too close when Grandpa's thinking. So that's how it is, sonk, Uncle Lem wound up. And this here little rattlesnake's inherited the whole shebang. Well, why don't you get this here gene chromosome feller to unscramble Junior and put him back the way other people are? I asked. I can see how easy you could do it. Look here, Uncle Lem. I focused down real sharp on Junior and made my eyes go funny the way you have to when you want to look inside a person. Sure enough, I seen just what Uncle Lem meant. There was teensy-weensy little chains of fellers, all hanging on to each other for dear life, and skinny little rods jiggling around inside them awful teensy cells everybody's made of, except maybe little Sam, our baby. Look here, Uncle Lem, I said. All you did when you gave Lily Lou the hex was to twitch these here little rods over that-a-way and patch 'em onto them little chains that wiggle so fast. Now, why can't you switch 'em back again and make Junior behave himself? It ought to be easy. It would be easy, Uncle Lem kinda sighed at me. Sonk, you're a scatterbrain. You wasn't listening to what I said. I can't switch 'em back without I kill Junior. The world would be a better place, I said. I know it would, but you know what we promised Grandpa? No more killings. But, Uncle Lem, I bust out, this is terrible. You mean this nasty little rattlesnake's going to go on all his life hexing people? Worse than that, sonk, poor Uncle Lem said, almost crying. Well, he's going to pass the power on to his descendants, just like Lily Lou passed it on to him. For a minute, it sure did look like a dark prospect for the human race. Then I laughed. Cheer up, Uncle Lem, I said. Nothing to worry about. Look at the little toad. There ain't a female critter alive who'd come within a mile of him. Already he's as repulsive as his daddy. And remember, he's Lily Lou Mutz's child, too. Maybe he'll get even horribler as he grows up. One thing's sure, he ain't never going to get married. Now there's where you're wrong, Ed Pugh busted in, talking real loud. He was red in the face and he looked mad. "Don't think I ain't been listening," he said. "And don't think I'm going to forget what you said about my child. I told you I was getting to be a power in this town. Junior and me can go a long way using his talent to help us. Already I got into the board of aldermen here, and there's going to be a vacancy in the state senate come next week, unless the old coot I have in mind's a lot tougher than he looks. So I'm warning you, young Hogben, you and your family's going to pay for them insults. Nobody ought to get mad when he hears the gospel truth about himself," I said. "Junior is a repulsive specimen. He just takes getting used to," his pa said. "All us Pews is hard to understand. Deep, I guess. But we got our pride, and I'm going to make sure the family line never dies out. Never. Do you hear that, Lemuel?" Uncle Lem just shut his eyes up tight and shook his head fast. "No, sirree," he said. "I'll never do it. Never, 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 never." "Lemuel," Ed Pugh said, real sinister. "Lemuel, do you want me to set Junior on you?" "Oh, there ain't no use in that," I said. "You seen him try to hex me along with the crowd, didn't you? No manner of use, Mr. Pugh, can't hex a hogben." "Well," he looked around, searching his mind. I'll think of something. Soft-hearted, aren't you? Promised your grandpappy you wouldn't kill nobody, hey? Lemuel, open your eyes and look over there across the street. See that sweet old lady walking with the cane? How'd you like it if I had Junior drop her dead in her tracks?" Uncle Lemuel just squeezed his eyes tighter shut. "I won't look. I don't know the sweet old thing. If she's that old, she ain't got much longer anyhow. Maybe she'd be better off dead. Probably got rheumatics, something fierce." "All right, then, how about that purty young girl with the baby in her arms? Look, Lemuel, mighty sweet-looking little baby. Pink ribbon in its bonnet, see? Look at them dimples. Junior, get ready to blight them where they stand. Bubonic plague to start with, maybe, and after that—" "Uncle Lem," I said, feeling uneasy, "I don't know what Grandpa would say to this. Maybe—" Uncle Lem popped his eyes wide open for just a second. He glared at me, frantic. "I can't help it if I've got a heart of gold," he said. "I'm a fine old feller and everybody picks on me. Well, I won't stand for it. You can push me just so far. Now, I don't care if Ed Pugh kills off the whole human race. I don't care if Grandpa does find out what I done. I don't care a hoot about nothing no more." He gave a kind of wild laugh. "I'm going to get out from under. I won't know nothing about nothing. I'm going to snatch me a few winks, sonk." And with that, he went rigid all over and fell flat on his face on the sidewalk, stiff as a poker. Chapter 3. Over a Barrel. Well, worried as I was, I had to smile. Uncle Lem's kind of cute sometimes. I'd knowed he'd put himself to sleep again, the way he always does when trouble catches up with him. Paul says it's catalepsy, but cats sleep a lot lighter than that. Uncle Lem hit the sidewalk flat and kind of bounced a little. Junior gave a howl of joy. I guess maybe he figured he'd had something to do with Uncle Lem falling over. Anyhow, seeing somebody down and helpless, Junior naturally rushed over and pulled his foot back and kicked Uncle Lem in the side of the head. Well, like I said, us hogbens have got pretty tough heads. Junior let out a howl. He started dancing around, nursing his foot in both hands. "I'll hex you good," he yelled at Uncle Lem. "I'll hex you good, you old hogben, you." He drew a deep breath and turned purple in the face, and then it happened. It was like a flash of lightning. I don't take no stock in hexes, and I had a fair idea of what was happening, but it took me by surprise. Paul tried to explain to me later how it worked, and he said it just stimulated the latent toxins inherent in the organism. It made Junior into a catalytoxic agent on account of the way the rearrangement of the desoxyribonucleic acid his genes was made of worked on the kappa waves of his nasty little brain, stepping them up as much as 30 microvolts. But shucks, you know Pa. He's too lazy to figure the thing out in English. He just steals them fool words out of other folks' brains when he needs 'em. What really happened was that all the poison that little varmint had bottled up in him, ready to let go on the crowd, somebody seemed to roar back and smack Uncle Lem right in the face. I never seen such a hex, and the awful part was, it worked. Because Uncle Lem wasn't resisting a mite now he was asleep. Red-hot pokers wouldn't have waked him up, and I wouldn't have put red-hot pokers past little Junior Pugh, but he didn't need 'em this time. The hex hit Uncle Lem like a thunderbolt. He turned pale green right before our eyes. Somehow it seemed to me a terrible silence fell as Uncle Lem went green. I looked up, surprised. Then I realized what was happening. All that pitiful moaning and groaning from the crowd had stopped. People was swigging away at their bottles of headache cure, rubbing their foreheads and kind of laughing weak-like with relief. Junior's whole complete hex had gone into Uncle Lem, and the crowd's headaches had naturally stopped right off. "What's happened here?" somebody called out in a kind of familiar voice. "Has that man fainted? Why don't you help him? Here, let me by. I'm a doctor." It was the skinny man with the kind-looking face. He was still drinking out of the headache bottle as he pushed his way through the crowd toward us, but he'd put his notebook away. When he saw Ed Pugh, he flushed up angry-like. "So it's you, is it, Alderman Pugh?" he said. "How is it you're always around when trouble starts? What did you do to this poor man, anyhow? Maybe this time you've gone too far." "I didn't do a thing," Ed Pugh said. "Never touched him. You watch your tongue, Dr. Brown, or you'll regret it. I'm a powerful man in this here town." "Look at that," Dr. Brown yells, his voice going kind of squeaky as he stares down at Uncle Lem. "The man's dying. Call an ambulance, somebody, quick." Uncle Lem was changing color again. I had to laugh a little inside my head. I knowed what was happening, and it was kind of funny. Everybody's got a whole herd of germs and viruses and such like critters swarming through them all the time, of course. When Junior's hex hit Uncle Lem, it stimulated the entire herd, something terrible, and a flock of little bitty critters Pa calls antibodies had to get to work pronto. They ain't really as sick as they look, being white by nature. Whenever a pison starts chawing on you, these pale little fellers grab up their shooting irons and run like crazy to the battlefield and your insides. Such fighting and yelling and swearing you never seen. It's a regular bull run. That was going on right then, inside Uncle Lem. Only us hogbens have got a special militia of our own inside us, and they got called up real fast. They was swearing and kicking and whopping the enemy so hard Uncle Lem had gone from pale green to a sort of purplish color, and big yeller and blue spots was beginning to bug out all over him where it showed. He looked uncommon sick. Of course, it didn't do him no real harm. The Hogben's militia can lick any germ that breathes. But he sure looked revolting. The skinny doctor crouched down beside Uncle Lem and felt his pulse. "Now you've done it," he said, looking up at Ed Pugh. "I don't know how you worked this, but for once you've gone too far. This man seems to have bubonic plague. I see you're put under control this time, and that young Kellicack of yours, too." Ed Pugh just laughed a little, but I could see he was mad. "Don't you worry about me, Dr. Brown," he said, mean. When I get to be governor and I got my plans all made, their hospital you're so proud of ain't gonna operate on state funds no more. A fine thing. Folks laying around in hospitals eating their fool heads off. Make 'em get out and plow, that's what I say. Us pews never get sick. I got lots of better uses for state money than paying folks to lay around in bed when I'm governor. All the doctor said was, "Where's that ambulance?" "If you mean that big long car making such a noise," I said, "it's about 3 miles off, but coming fast. Uncle Lem don't need no help, though. He's just having an attack. We get 'em in the family all the time. It don't mean nothing." "Good heavens," the doc said, staring down at Uncle Lem. "You mean he's had this before and lived?" Then he looked up at me and smiled all of a sudden. "Oh, I see," he said. "Afraid of hospitals, are you? Well, don't worry, we won't hurt him." That surprised me some. He was a smart man. I'd fibbed a little for just that reason. Hospitals is no place for hogbens. People in hospitals are too danged nosy. So I called Uncle Lem real loud inside my head. "Uncle Lem," I hollered, only thinking it, not out loud. "Uncle Lem, wake up quick. Grandpa'll nail your hide to the barn door if you let yourself get took to a hospital. You want him to find out about them 2 hearts you got in your chest, and the way your bones are fixed in the shape of your gizzard? Uncle Lem, wake up." It wasn't no manner of use. He never even twitched. Right then, I began to get really scared. Uncle Lem had sure landed me in the soup. There I was with all that responsibility on my shoulders, and I didn't have the least idea how to handle it. I'm just a young feller, after all. I can hardly remember much farther back than the Great Fire of London, when Charles II was king, with all them long curls a-hanging on his shoulders. On him, though, they looked good. "Mr. Pugh," I said, "you've got to call off Junior. I can't let Uncle Lem get took to the hospital. You know I can't." "Junior, pour it on," Mr. Pugh said, grinning real nasty. "I want a little talk with young Hogben here." Doctor looked up puzzled, and Ed Pugh said, "Step over here, mite Hogben. I want a private word with you. Junior, bear down." Uncle Lem's yellow and blue spots got green rings round their outside edges. Doctor sort of gasped, and Ed Pugh took my arm and pulled me back. When we was out of earshot, he said to me, confidential, fixing me with his tiny little eyes, "I reckon you know what I want, Hogben. Lem never did say he couldn't. He only said he wouldn't, so I know you folks can do it for me." "Just exactly what is it you want, Mr. Pugh?" I asked him. "You know, I want to make sure our fine old family line goes on. I want there should always be Pughs. I had so much trouble getting married off myself, and I know Junior ain't going to be easy to wife. Women don't have no taste nowadays. Since Lily Lou went to glory, there hasn't been a woman on earth ugly enough to marry a Pugh, and I'm scared Junior will be the last of a great line. With his talent, I can't bear the thought. You just fix it so our family won't never die out, and I'll have Junior take the hex off Lemuel." "If I fixed it so your line didn't die out," I said, "I'd be fixing it so everybody else's line would die out, just as soon as there was enough Pughs around." "What's wrong with that?" Ed Pugh asked, grinning. "Well, I see it. We're good, strong stock." He flexed his gorilla arms. He was taller than me, even. "No harm in populating the world with good stock, is there? I figured given time enough, us Pughs could conquer the whole dang world. And you're going to help us do it, young Hogben." "Oh, no," I said. "Oh, no, even if I knowed how." There was a terrible noise at the end of the street, and the crowd scattered to make way for the ambulance, which drawed up at the curb beside Uncle Lem. A couple of fellers in white coats jumped out with a sort of pallet on sticks.
Dr. Brown stood up, looking real relieved.
"Thought you'd never get here," he said. "This man's a quarantine case, I think. Heaven knows what kind of results we'll find when we start running tests on him. Hand me my bag out of the back there, will you? I want my stethoscope. There's something funny about this man's heart." Well, my heart sunk right down into my boots. We was goners, and I knowed it. The whole Hogben tribe. Once them doctors and scientists find out about us, we'll never know a moment's peace again, as long as we live. We won't have no more privacy than a corncob. Ed Pugh was watching me with a nasty grin on his pasty face. "Worried, huh?" he said. "You got a right to be worried. I know about you hogbens, all witches. Once they get Lem in the hospital, no telling what they'll find out. Against the law to be witches, probably. You got about half a minute to make up your mind, young Hogben. What do you say?"
Well, what could I say? I couldn't give him a promise like he was asking, could I? Not and let the whole world be overrun by hexen pews. Us Hogbens lived a long time. We got some pretty important plans for the future when the rest of the world begins to catch up with us. But if by that time the rest of the world is all pews, it won't hardly seem worthwhile somehow. I couldn't say yes. But if I said no, Uncle Lem was a goner. Us Hogbens was doomed either way, it seemed to me. Looked like there was only one thing to do. I took a deep breath, shut my eyes, and let out a desperate yell inside my head. "Grandpa!" I hollered. "Yes, my boy," said a big, deep voice in the middle of my brain. You'd have thought he'd been right all alongside me all the time, just waiting to be called. He was 100-odd miles off and sound asleep. But when a hogman calls in the tone of voice I called, he's got a right to expect an answer. Quick. I got it. Mostly Grandpa would have dithered around for 15 minutes asking cross questions and not listening to the answers and talking in all kinds of queer old-fashioned dialects like Sanskrit he's picked up through the years. But this time he seen it was serious. "Yes, my boy," was all he said. I flapped my mind wide open like a school book in front of him. There wasn't no time for questions and answers. The doc was getting out his dingus to listen to Uncle Lem's two hearts beating out of tune, and once he heard that, the jig would be up for us hogbens. "Unless you let me kill him, Grandpa," I added, because by that time I knowed he'd read the whole situation from start to finish in one fast glance. It seemed to me he was quiet an awful long time after that. The doc had got the dingus out, and he was fitting its little black arms into his ears. Ed Pugh was watching me like a hawk. Junior stood there all swole up with pison, blinking his mean little eyes around for somebody to shoot it at. I was half hoping he'd pick on me. I'd worked out a way to make it bounce back in his face, and there was a chance it might even kill him. I heard Grandpa give a sort of sigh in my mind. "They've got us over a barrel, Sonk," he said. I remember being a little surprised he could speak right plain English when he wanted to. "Tell Pugh we'll do it." "But, Grandpa," I said. "Do as I say." It gave me a headache, he spoke so firm. "Quick, Sonk, tell Pugh we'll give him what he wants." Well, I didn't dare disobey, but this once I really came close to defying Grandpa. It stands to reason even a hogman has got to get senile someday, and I thought maybe old age had finally set in with Grandpa at last. What I thunk at him was, "All right, if you say so, but I sure hate to do it. Seems like if they got us going and coming, the least we can do is take our medicine like hogbens and keep all that pison bottled up in Junior instead of spreading it around the world." But out loud, I spoke to Mr. Pugh. "All right, Mr. Pugh," I said, real humble. "You win. Only call off your hex. Quick, before it's too late." Chapter 4. Pew's a-coming. Mr. Pugh had a great big yellow automobile, low slung without no top. It went awful fast, and it was sure awful noisy. Once I'm pretty sure we run over a small boy in the road, but Mr. Pugh paid him no mind, and I didn't dare say nothing. Like Grandpa said, the Pughs had us over a barrel. It took quite a lot of palaver before I convinced them they'd have to come back to the homestead with me. That was part of Grandpa's orders.
How do I know you won't murder us in cold blood once you get us out there in the wilderness?
Mr. Pugh asked. I could kill you right here if I wanted, I told him. I would, too, but Grandpa says no. You're safe if Grandpa says so, Mr. Pugh. The word of a hogman ain't never been broken yet. So he agreed, mostly because I said we couldn't work the necessary spells except on home territory. We loaded Uncle Lem into the back of the car and took off for the hills. Had quite an argument with the doc, of course. Uncle Lem sure was stubborn. He wouldn't wake up nobody, but once Junior took the hex off Uncle Lem, fatted out fast to a good healthy color again. The doc just didn't believe it could have happened, even when he saw it. Mr. Pugh had to threaten quite a lot before we got away. We left the doc sitting on the curb, muttering to himself and rubbing his head, dazed like. I could feel Grandpa studying the Pughs through my mind all the way home. He seemed to be sighing and kind of shaking his head, such as it is, and working out problems that didn't make no manner of sense to me. When we drawed up in front of the house, there wasn't a soul in sight. I could hear Grandpa stirring and muttering on his gunny sack in the attic, but Pa seemed to have went invisible, and he was too drunk to tell me where he was when I asked. The baby was asleep. Ma was still at the church sociable, and Grandpa said to leave her be.
We can work this out together, Sonk, he said as soon as I got out of the car. I've been thinking, you know that sled you fixed up to sour your ma's cream this morning? Drag it out, son, drag it out.
I seen in a flash what he had in mind.
Oh, no, Grandpa,
I said right out loud.
Who you talking to? Ed Pugh asked, lumbering down out of the car. I don't see nobody. This your homestead? Ratty old dump, ain't it? Stay close to me, Junior. I don't trust these folks any farther than I can see 'em. Get the sled, Sonk, Grandpa said, very firm. I got it all worked out. We're going to send these two gorillas right back through time to a place they really fit. But, Grandpa, I hollered, only inside my head this time. Let's talk this over. Let me get Ma in on it anyhow. Pa's right smart when he's sober. Why not wait till he wakes up?
I think we ought to get the baby in on it, too. I don't think sending him back through time's a good idea at all, Grandpa.
The baby's asleep, Grandpa said. You leave him be. He read himself to sleep over his Einstein, bless his little soul.
I think the thing that worried me most was the way Grandpa was talking plain English. He never does when he's feeling normal. I thought maybe his old age had all caught up with him at one bank and knocked all the sense out of his, so to speak, head. Grandpa, I said, trying to keep calm, don't you see? If we send him back through time and give him what we promised, it'll make everything 1,000,000 times worse than before. You gonna strand him back there in the year 1 and break your promise to him?
Sonk, Grandpa said.
I know, if we promised we'd make sure the Pugh line won't die out, then we gotta make sure. But if we send him back to the year 1, that'll mean all the time between then and now they'll spend spreading out and spreading out. More Pughs every generation. Grandpa, 5 seconds after they hit the year 1, I'm liable to feel my 2 eyes rush together in my head, my face go all fat and pasty like Junior. Grandpa, everybody in the world may be Pughs if we give them that much time to spread out in.
Cease thy churming, thou chilse dolt, Grandpa hollered. Do my bidding, young fool.
That made me feel a little better, but not much. I went and dragged out the sled. Mr. Pugh put up quite an argument about that.
I ain't rid on a sled since I was so high, he said. Why should I get on one now? This is some trick. I won't do it.
Junior tried to bite me. Now, Mr. Pugh, I said, you gotta cooperate or we won't get nowheres. I know what I'm doing. Just step up here and sit down. Junior, there's room for you in front. That's fine. If he hadn't seen how worried I was, I don't think he'd have done it, but I couldn't hide how I was feeling.
Where's your grandpa? He asked, uneasy. You're not gonna do this whole trick yourself, are you? Young ignorant feller like you? I don't like it. Suppose you made a mistake.
We give our word, I reminded him. Now just kindly shut up and let me concentrate, or maybe you don't want the pew line to last forever.
That was the promise, he says, settling himself down. You gotta do it. Let me know when you commence. All right, Sonk, Grandpa says from the attic, right brisk. Now you watch. Maybe you'll learn a thing or two. Look sharp, focus your eyes down, and pick a gene. Any gene.
Bad as I felt about the whole thing, I couldn't help being interested. When Grandpa does a thing, he does it up brown. Genes are mighty slippery little critters, spindle-shaped and awful teensy. They're partners with some skinny guys called chromosomes, and the two of them show up everywhere you look once you've got your eyes focused just right.
A good dose of ultraviolet ought to do the trick, Grandpa muttered. Sonk, you're closer.
I said, all right, Grandpa, and sort of twiddled the light as it sifted down through the pines above the pews. Ultraviolet's a color at the other end of the line where the colors stop having names for most people.
Grandpa said, thanks, son. Hold it for a minute.
The genes began to twiddle right in time with the light waves. Junior said,
Pa, something's tickling me.
Ed Pugh said,
shut up.
Grandpa was muttering to himself. I'm pretty sure he stole the words from that professor we keep in the bottle, but you can't tell with Grandpa. Maybe he was the first person to make 'em up in the beginning.
The euchromatin, he kept muttering. That ought to fix it. Ultraviolet gives us hereditary mutation, and the euchromatin contains the genes that transmit heredity. Now that other stuff's heterochromatin, and that produces evolutionary change of the cataclysmic variety. Very good, very good. We can always use a new species. About 6 bursts of heterochromatinic activity ought to do it.
He was quiet for a minute, and then he said,
Ish am eldre and ek magti. Okay, Sonk, take it away.
I let the ultraviolet go back where it came from. The year 1, Grandpa? I asked, very doubtful.
That's close enough, he said. What thou the way?
Oh, yes, Grandpa, I said, and I bent over and gave them the necessary push. Last thing I heard was Mr. Pugh's howl.
What's that you're doing?
He hollered at me.
What's the idea? Look out there, young Hogben, or what's this? What's this? Where we going? Young Sonk, I warn you, if this is some trick, I'll set Junior on you. I'll send you such a hex as even you...
Then the howl got real thin and small and far away until it wasn't no more than the noise a mosquito makes. After that, it was mighty quiet in the dooryard. I stood there all braced, ready to stop myself from turning into a pew if I could. Them little genes is tricky, fellas. I knowed Grandpa had made a terrible mistake. The minute them pews hit the year one and started to bounce back through time toward now, I knowed what would happen. I ain't sure how long ago the year one was, but there was plenty of time for the pews to populate the whole planet. I put 2 fingers against my nose to keep my eyes from banging each other when they started to rush together in the middle, like all us pews' eyes do. "You ain't a pew yet, son," Grandpa said, chuckling. "Can you see him?" "No," I said. "What's happening?" "The sled's starting to slow down," he said. "Now it's stopped. Yep, it's the year one, all right. Look at all them men and women flocking out of the caves to greet their new company. My, what great big shoulders the men have got. Bigger even than Pa Pew's. And, just look at the women. I declare, little Junior's positively handsome alongside them folks. He won't have no trouble finding a wife when the time comes." "But, Grandpa, that's terrible," I said. "Don't sass your elders, Sonk," Grandpa chuckled. "Look a there now. Junior's just pulled a hex. Another little child fell over flat on his ugly face. Now the little child's mother is knocking Junior endwise. Now his pappy is sailing into Pa Pew. Look at that fight. Just look at it. Oh, I guess the Pew family's well took care of, Sonk." "But what about our family?" I said, almost wailing. "Don't you worry," Grandpa said. "Time'll take care of that. Wait a minute. Let me watch. Generation don't take long when you know how to look. My, what ugly little critters the 10 baby Pews was. They was just like their pappy and their grandpappy. I wish Lily Lou Mutz could see her grandbabies, I surely do. Well, now, ain't that cute? Every one of them babies growed up in a flash, seems like, and each of them has got 10 babies of their own. I like to see my promises working out, Sonk. I said I'd do this, and I done it." I just moaned. "All right," Grandpa said. "Let's jump ahead a couple of centuries. Yep, still there and spreading like crazy. Family likeness is still strong, too. Another 1,000 years and, well, I declare, if it ain't ancient Greece, hasn't changed a bit, neither. What do you know, Sonk?" He cackled right out, tickled pink. "Remember what I said once about Lily Lou putting me in mind of an old friend of mine named Gorgon? No wonder. Perfectly natural. You ought to see Lily Lou's great-great-great-great-grandbabies. No, on second thought, it's lucky you can't. Well, this is sure interesting." He was still about 3 minutes. Then I heard him laugh. "Bang," he said. "First heterochromatic burst. Now the changes start." "What changes, Grandpa?" I asked, feeling pretty miserable. "The changes," he said, "that show your old grandpa ain't such a fool as you thought. I know what I'm doing. They go fast once they start. Look there now, that's the second change. Look at them little genes mutate." "You mean," I said, "I ain't going to turn into a pew after all? But, Grandpa, I thought we'd promised the pews their line wouldn't die out." "I'm keeping my promise," Grandpa said, dignified. "The genes will carry the pew likeness right on to the toot of the judgment horn, just like I said, and the hex power goes right along with it." Then he laughed. "You better brace yourself, Sonk," he said. "When Pa Pew went sailing off into the year one, seems like he uttered a hex threat, didn't he? Well, he wasn't fooling. It's a-coming at you right now." "Oh, Lordy," I said. "There'll be 1,000,000 of 'em by the time they get here. Grandpa, what'll I do?" "Just brace yourself," Grandpa said, real unsympathetic. 1,000,000, you think? Oh, no, lots more than 1,000,000. "How many?" I asked him. He started in to tell me. You may not believe it, but he's still telling me. It takes that long. There's that many of them. You see, it was like with that there Jukes family that lived down south of here. The bad ones was always a mite worse than their children, and the same dang thing happened to Gene Chromosome and his kin, so to speak. The Pews stayed Pews, and they kept the hex power, and I guess you might say the Pews conquered the whole world after all. But it could have been worse. The Pews could have stayed the same size down through the generations. Instead, they got smaller, a whole lot smaller. When I knowed 'em, they was bigger than most folks. Paw Pew, anyhow. But by the time they'd done filtering the generations from the year one, they'd shrunk so much, them little pale fellers in the blood was about half their size. And many a knockdown, drag-out fight they have with 'em, too. Them Pew genes took such a beating from the heterochromatic bursts Grandpa told me about that they got whooped all out of their proper form. You might call 'em a virus now, and of course a virus is exactly the same thing as a gene, except the virus is friskier. But heavens above, that's like saying the Jukes boys is exactly the same as George Washington. The hex hit me hard. I sneezed something terrible. Then I heard Uncle Lem sneezing in his sleep, lying back there in the yaller car. Grandpa was still droning on about how many Pews was a-comin' at me right that minute, so there wasn't no use asking questions. I fixed my eyes different and looked right down into the middle of that sneeze to see what had tickled me. Well, you never seen so many junior Pews in all your born days. It was the hex, all right. Likewise, them Hughes is still busy hexing everybody on earth off and on. They'll do it for quite a time, too, since the Pew line has got to go on forever, account of Grandpa's promise. They tell me even the microscopes ain't never yet got a good look at certain viruses. The scientists are sure in for a surprise someday when they focus down real close and see all of them pasty-faced little devils, ugly as sin, with their eyes set real close together, wiggling around hexing everybody in sight. It took a long time, since the year one, that is, but Gene Chromosome fixed it up, with Grandpa's help. So, Junior Pew ain't a pain in the neck no more, so to speak. But I got to admit, he's an awful cold in the head. The old Army game. I used to think there wasn't much to this Army life, just marching around, toting a firearm, and wearing khaki. First off, I was glad to get out in the Kentuck hills, figuring that I'd see the world and maybe some excitement. Things has been awful dull in Piney since the last of the Fletcher boys was killed off, and Uncle Aylmer was Alice talking about how he shouldn't have plugged Jared Fletcher, 'cause that ended the clan and there wasn't anybody left to fight with. Uncle took to drinking corn, liquor, serious-like after that, and we had to keep the still running overtime to keep him supplied. Anyhow, the teacher up at Piney, Alice, told me to start a yarn at the beginning, so I guess I will. Only I don't know when the beginning happened. Might have been the day I got a letter that said Hewitt Hogben on the front, or so Pa said, and he's got a mite of book learning. Yep, he said. That's an H, all righty. Guess it's for you, Sonk. They call me Sonk, 'cause I'm kind of short and runty, as the Hogbens go. Ma says I ain't got my full growth yet, but I'm nigh 22 and hardly over 6 feet at all. I've been kind of touchy about my runtness all along, so I used to sneak off and chop kindling to give me strength. Anyhow, Pa took the letter over to the teacher to get it read, and he come back ranting and raving. "Fighting," he yelled. "There's a war going on. Come on, Elmer, get your shooting iron." Uncle Elmer was sitting in a corner drinking corn and weaning the new baby with it. "War's over," he mumbled, kind of mad-like. "Them damn Yankees was too much for us. General Lee's dead, I hear." "Days of war," Pa said, stubborn. The teacher says Sonk's gotta go. Mean to say we're seceding again? Uncle Elmer asked him, tilting the jug. I always said them damn Yankees couldn't make us stay in their union.
Well, I don't know about that, Pa told him. I couldn't make head nor tail out in what the blabbermouth teacher was saying. My idea is that they's a war.
Ma was getting her muzzle loader out of the closet.
Come on, Elmer, she said. We'll all go. Dunno what good a runty little shote like you can do, she said to me, but you can shoot straight, kinda.
Shucks, Ma, I said, noticing the teacher coming up the path on his mule. Well, I can fight good.
Them Bowyer boys near licked you,
Uncle Elmer cackled.
And they was only 6 of 'em.
They jumped me from behind, I argued. Anyway, when I got my wind back, I licked 'em good.
Jabbering like jaybirds, Ma said. Let's get going.
So we all went out the door, kind of tromping on the teacher, but it was his own fault because he didn't get out of the way fast enough. Ma's got a soft heart, though, so she come back and picked him up. He was mumbling something about gorillas and buffalo, but he come to when we poured some corn down his wheezing after a little scrap with Uncle Elmer, who didn't want to give up the jug. The teacher jumped up sudden and stuck his head in a pail of water on the table, but we ignored him, polite-like, being he's a furriner.
First you stampede all over me, he says, kind of bitter. And then you revive me with molten lava. God! Don't you use that kind of language, Ma tells him, jerking her head toward me. We got a grown boy here. If he grows any more, they'll build a penthouse on his head, the teacher says, which I don't understand.
Well, we're in a hurry, Uncle Elmer growls, getting the jug back.
There isn't any war, the teacher yells, clawing at his hair. Mr. Hogben ran away before he understood.
Well, he kept talking, and after a while we understood what it was all about. It seems like some clans are feuding in Europe, and it's up to us to oil our fire irons in case they get too rambunctious and start taking pot shots at us. On common good sense, Ma said, and we'd all join up.
You can't, the teacher said, red around the gills. It's just Hewitt that's drafted. Might's well draft the baby, Pa snapped. Sonk ain't got his full growth yet. He's over 21. You're too old, Mr. Hogben. Pa started for the teacher, but Ma grabbed him sudden-like. Calm down, she snapped at him, so he subsided, still growling. You ain't a chicken no more. Just how old are you, Mr. Hogben? The teacher asked. I lost count back in '87, Pa said, thoughtful. I'm 103, Uncle Elmer cackled, but everybody in Piney knows what a liar he is. The teacher shut his eyes up tight and said in a funny voice, The President of the United States signed a bill drafting men between the ages of 21 and 35. Hewitt's supposed to join the Army for a year unless he's exempt. He's too runty, Pa said, jealous-like. They won't take him. But Ma was looking thoughtful. You got to do what the president wants, Sonk. Now you just sit down with the teacher and see if you can figure out what's in his mind. So I did what she told me, and we filled out the paper the president had sent me. There was a bit of trouble because Uncle Elmer kept interrupting, but after a while the teacher kind of grabbed the jug and swallowed some corn. Whoosh, he said, busting out in a sweat. Desperate ills require desperate measures. Let's see, Sonk, what's your income? I traded old Langland some corn for a pair of breeches once, I said, hesitating. Smack! Ma hit me over the head with her broomstick. Where'd you get that corn? She asked. Stealing it from the still? Shucks, no, Ma, I said, ducking. Uncle Elmer gave it to me for not telling about the time he—" "Shut up!" Uncle Elmer yelled, kicking out at me. "Income," the teacher said, kind of screaming. "Cash, hard money." "I found a nickel last May," I said. I never saw a man lose his temper so quick, but I made allowances because the teacher's a foreigner, and after he'd gulped some more corn, he felt better. Anyway, he took the paper away and said he'd tend to it. So, nothing more was done till one day teacher told me I'd have to go to the draft board. Everything was kind of mixed up in my mind until suddenly I found myself in a room with Uncle Elmer and a few other men I didn't know. They talked funny. They told me to take off my clothes and go into the next room, which I did, and a little feller in there yelled something about a bear and ran out, leaving the door open. I looked around, but I didn't see no bear. So I waited till he came back with a big man who was grinning all over his face. "Okay, Doc," he said. "That's no bear. That's Hewitt Hogben, according to the files." "He's, hairy," the little runt said. "I didn't get to shave last week," I explained. "We was slaughtering the pigs and the razor got lost somewheres. Anyway, I ain't hairy. You ought to see Pa. He's got a pelt like one of them things the teacher calls a yak." The doctor was hitting me on the chest, but I didn't feel it. After a mite, he said, "Sound as a bell. Pick up that weight, Hogben." He pointed to a chunk of iron on the floor with a handle on top, so I hefted it. It looked heavier than it was, and it got away from us somehow and went sailing up the wall. Plaster came spurting out. "Good heavens," the doctor said. "Shucks, I'm sorry," I told him. "You'll be sorrier," he said, "when you get to camp and start taking orders from a top sergeant. You'll spend your time in the guardhouse, or I don't know, top sergeants." There was a kind of a rumpus then, because Uncle Elmer found out they wouldn't let him join up, and he took off his peg leg and sailed into him. Well, I finally wrapped my arms around him, trying not to listen to his language, which wasn't anything for a grown boy like me to hear, and tied him on the mule, which I smacked on the rump and sent home. Last I see of Uncle Elmer was his face bobbing up and down under the mule while the poor critter's hide was rising in blisters from his unrestrained cursing. Then I noticed everybody in the street was staring at me, and I remember I didn't have nothing on. I never been so embarrassed. Teacher says that when a lot of things happen you don't want to tell about it, you just put a line of little stars on the paper. Well, I can do that, but my buddy's writing this down, and he'll make the stars. All that means I got dressed again, went through a lot of rigmarole, and found myself finally in camp, a regular soldier. Doctor wasn't speaking true when he said I'd be in the guardhouse all the time, though. Ma always told me to obey orders, at least till I got my growth. So I did. Sometimes people would get mad without having any reason for it, like the time we was at shooting practice, and after plugging the bullseye on my target, I shot out the centers of all the other targets too. And then they got rambunctious when I cut holes in my shoes so's my feet would have room, and the time I stepped on a feller's face, but that was just an accident. I kind of stumbled and he got tromped on, but he was picking on my buddy and hit me on the nose when I told him to stop, and they carted him off to the hospital and put me in the calaboose. My buddy's name was Jimmy Mack, and he was educated beyond all reason. He was a skinny little feller, just over the weight limit, and I guess we stuck together 'cause we was both runts. He said his grandpa had more book learning than he did. Grandpa Eliphalet Mack, his name was, and he invented things. Everybody thought he was crazy, but Jimmy said that he wasn't. He was working on a gadget to make airplanes fly better, an alloy, Jimmy called it. Seems like if a plane was made of this stuff, it could be awful big and carry enough gas to fly awful far. Only Grandpa hadn't invented the alloy yet, but kept blowing himself up instead. He lived not far from the camp, and we visited him once on leave, but only got blowed up a mite when he tried to show us how this stuff worked.
We left him crying and combing his whiskers, which had got burnt a trifle, but Jimmy said Grandpa would win out yet. The camp was right near big woods, and I'd sneak off there whenever I got the chance to tend to some business I had. It was kind of private, so I didn't even tell Jimmy, and that got me in trouble. One day he brought me up before a room full of brass-button officers and asked me questions I couldn't figure out. The major kind of liked me, but he looked awful mad. He kept fumbling with the crumpled paper he was holding and staring at me. "Private Hogben," he said, sudden-like. "Where were you this afternoon?" "Shucks, Major," I told him. "I just went for a walk." "Outside the camp?" "Well, yes, sir," I said, not wanting to lie. "Well, that was out of bounds, and it wasn't the first time. You've been seen going into the woods more than once." "I just like to tromp around the hills, Major," I said. A man with a white mustache made a noise like he'd swallowed the wrong way and looked at me very mean. "Expect us to believe that?" he asked. "Shucks, I do like to tromp around," I said. "That wasn't the reason you've been going into the hills. What's the explanation of this paper the inspecting officer found in your pocket?" The major showed me the scrap, which was burned at the edges. "I found it," I said, "just today when I was back in the woods. It was fluttering along, so I picked it up." "Know what it says?" "I couldn't read it very well. I thought I'd get Jimmy to read it to me." "Jimmy?" the mustache asked, and the major said, "Private Mac, well, he's above suspicion." "Nobody is, especially with this code message mapping the camp and estimating, well, information." "Listen, Colonel," the major said, "Private Hogben's not a spy, I'm sure of that. I think someone was on the hill mapping the camp and following our maneuvers, and then Hogben came along and frightened him. He tried to burn the paper, but it blew away before he finished the job." "Somewhat far-fetched, Major," the colonel growled. "These weren't secret maneuvers anyway, sir. Why should a spy want—" "They're thorough," the colonel said, and I wondered who they were. "Work like machines, cover every detail, even if it seems unimportant. We can't risk a spy in camp, Private Hogben. You are under arrest." "Till we investigate further," the major told me, friendly-like, but I shook my head. "Can it wait till tomorrow, sir?" I asked. "Jimmy and me got leave to visit his grandpa. He wrote his inventions all finished, and he wanted to show it to us." "Your leave's canceled," the colonel snapped. "Whom have you been meeting in the woods?" "It ain't true," I said. "Sir, I just promised to go with Jimmy, and Ma told me never to break a promise." "Guardhouse," the colonel said, awful loud, and I was took away by the OD, feeling mighty bad. After a while, I found out Jimmy had already left, leaving word for me to catch up with him on the road. He didn't know I was in the guardhouse, I guess. Far as I could figure out, I hadn't done anything wrong, and I'd promised Jimmy. So when it got dark, I squoze out through the window after bending the bars a little and skinning my knuckles on them. The moon was just coming up over the hill, and the sentry saw me. He was a feller who had tried to pick on Jimmy a while before, and he had it in for me. I tried not to hurt him, but I figured he'd duck when he saw my fist coming. He kept moaning sort of feeble-like after that, and I got worried about leaving him out in the open, because it was pretty chilly. Finally, I shoved him into the cell I'd squoze out of and laid him out peaceful. I took a loose tooth out of his mouth so he wouldn't swallow it by accident and left him. It was risky getting past the guards, but I managed it, picking up a jug of corn on the way and then heading for the road. It was a nice night, bright as day, with jaybirds hollering in the moonlight and cars ripping past on the highway, and the snow piled up on the trees. I felt good enough to spit, so I tilted the jug, swallowed some corn, and started out.
Might have been half an hour when a car came rattling past like a bat out of hell. Jimmy's grandpa, Eliphalet Mac, was driving it, his whiskers flapping, but he didn't hear me when I yelled. I crawled out of the ditch where I'd jumped as he came to see me, took another drink, and jumped back again as a big black sedan swooshed past. It was full of men. One of them yelled something like, "Dummkopf," at me, but that didn't seem to mean anything. I drank some more corn and got ready to hide in the ditch again as another car came racing along. It stopped when it saw me, though, and I saw Jimmy was at the wheel with a little bald-headed man beside him. "Sonk!" my buddy yelled. "Jump in, quick!" "What's all the fuss about?" I asked, strolling over. "I just saw your grandpa." Jimmy dragged me into the back of the car. The little bald-headed man got out, said, "You can have the bus," and ran off up the road. Then we started off again, faster than I'd ever rode before in my life. "Shucks," I said, crawling into the front seat. "Take it easy, Jimmy. What's the rush?" "Fifth columnists," my buddy said. "They've been hanging around here trying to get army information, I guess, and they found out about Grandpa's invention. When I got there, they were trying to make him give the formula." "Huh?" I said. "Spies," Jimmy yelled at me. "Foreign agents. We had a fight, and Grandpa got away with the papers. They followed him in their car, and I commandeered one myself when I woke up. Sweet little bus, isn't it?" Jimmy's a mechanic. He's always talking about engines and things. "That bald-headed little guy, who was he?" I asked. "This is his car. He'd been begging me to let him get out for miles, but I didn't dare stop." We swung around a turn, skidded on slush, climbed halfway up a bank, swiveled around, and came down again. I crawled back into the front seat and drank more corn. "You ain't just right in the head, Jimmy," I said. "What's all this about?" "I've been trying to explain it to you, numbskull," he yelled. "Those men are trying to get Grandpa's formulas away from him. The warplane alloy secret. The method's perfected now." "Why didn't your grandpa call the police?" I asked. "There aren't any around this farm. He's heading for camp. I'll bet. It's the closest place where he can get help." A touring car was trying to hog the road in front of us. Jimmy blew his horn and swung out. I heard a scraping noise and some yelling, but when I opened my eyes again, the touring car was gone. Looking back, I saw it way on a hillside, wedged in between a couple of pines. "There they are," Jimmy said. We were getting close to the camp. The road was pretty straight for a ways, with hills on both sides and the woods looking pretty in the moonlight. Grandpa Eliphalet's car was way ahead, but suddenly it started swaying, ran off in the ditch, and fell over. "Blowout," Jimmy groaned. The black sedan was ahead of us, too. I saw Grandpa climb out of the wrecked car, look back, and then start running up the slope into the woods. The sedan stopped, and men jumped out of it and took after Grandpa. They were shooting at him. "I see now," I said. "They're feuding with your grandpa." A bullet whanged off the front of our car. 2 men were waiting for us, the others having gone off into the woods. Jimmy ducked and jammed on the brakes. Being as I was, drinking from the jug, I didn't notice anything wrong till I went sailing through the windshield. I landed pretty hard, and there was a chunk of glass in my scalp that was hurting me, so I sat up and picked it out. I was tangled up with the remains of Grandpa Eliphalet's car, which we'd hit, and 2 fellers were tangling up with Jimmy. He could fight for a runt his size. But one of them got behind him, grabbed his arms, and then the others let fly a punch that hit my buddy right in the jaw. "Quit that," I said, angry-like. "Let him be, hear me?" Jimmy slumped down in the snow and didn't move, but the 2 men whirled, surprised. They were big, husky fellers, and both of them had little toy shooting irons that they aimed at me. "Another soldier,"
one of them said.
Kill the Schweinhund.
Well, Ma always told me guns weren't meant to play with, so when they started to shoot, I kind of scrooged down behind what was left of Grandpa's car. The engine looked pretty shaky, and it was, for when I sort of leaned against it, it busted right off from the rest of the machine. I ducked just in time, but a bullet nicked my ear. The two men were walking toward me, firing.
He's not armed, Hans, one of the fellers grunted. You circle to the right.
That's what they call a flank attack in the Army. I knew better than to let somebody with a gun get behind me, so I thought I'd act fast while they was still together. I picked up the engine and heaved it at those fellers, though it was uncommon heavy.
Gott, said one, and the other said, Der Teufel.
They went back into a snowbank with the engine on top of them, so all I could see was their feet sticking out. The feet wiggled for a minute or so and then stopped. So I kind of figured they wouldn't give no trouble for a while. But poor Jimmy was slumped down with his eyes shut. I looked around for the jug to revive him, only it had been smashed, and the snow was sizzling a mite when the corn had spilled. A jaybird was splashing around in the puddle and squawking fit to be tied. I picked up Jimmy and started back for the camp, where I had another jug of corn cached away. Grandpa Eliphalet was yelling way back in the woods, but Ma always told me it ain't polite to go busting into another clan's feuds. Well, it was different with Jimmy, 'cause he was my buddy. But I remember last July when the Goodwins ganged up on Jim Martin, who walks with a crutch, and after I'd roughed up the Godwins, old Jim took after me, shooting and yelling for me to mind my own business. Ma said it served me right, as she picked buckshot out in my hide. But all of a sudden I noticed that the yells were coming from a hill where a big blasted pine stood up all alone. Then I changed my mind. I put Jimmy down carefully in the ditch and ran up the slope. My feet hurt, so I took my shoes off and left them in a holler log, and then I kept on running. I ain't much given to newfangled contraptions anyhow. There's a wash, a sort of gully that splits the hill, and up near the edge of that, under some pines, was Grandpa Eliphalet scrapping with the 4 men. But he wasn't no match for them. They got him down and held him whilst he cussed fit to singe his whiskers. Ach, said one of them, a big husky feller with a mustache. A verdammt soldier. Hold on, I said. Don't point that shooting iron at me, mister. You mind your business, and I'll mind mine. He's not armed, Kurt, another of the 4 whispered. Perhaps. Kurt looked around. Are you alone? He kept the gun pointed at me. Sure, I said. I just want to say you ain't got no call to be traipsing all around here. You better clear out before I make you. Meantime, Grandpa was squealing like a stick hog. Help! He kept yelling. Murder! I can't help you, I told him. Ma always said to keep out in other people's feuds. What do you all intend to do? I asked Kurt. We were just leaving, he said, looking at me funny like. All right then, I said. Long as you're leaving, I'll be running along myself then. But just as I turned, the gun went off, and something whammed me alongside the head. Lucky I'd turned when I did. My brains would have been spattered all over the country. Even as it was, the bullet knocked me out for a mite, and when I woke up, I was standing in the snow, tied to a tree. I couldn't have been unsensible long, I figured, but Grandpa Eliphalet was tied near me to another pine. You ain't right friendly, I said, reproving. I ain't aiming to bust into your feuds. Silence, Schweinhund, growled Kurt. Now we must work fast. We have little time. Where did you hide those papers, you old fool? Grandpa just shook his head, looking mad. Kurt grinned. Take off his shoes. Give me the matches. While you're at it, Fritz, see if that imbecile soldier knows anything. Shucks, I'm just a buck private, I told him, but he didn't listen. Grandpa yelled and cussed fearful while they was unlacing his shoes, but he was only practicing, I guess. When they lit matches under his feet, his profanity was an education. I tried to remember some of it to tell Uncle Elmer, though I knew if Ma ever found out about it, she'd skin me. Meantime, they was putting matches up against my feet, too, and I thanked 'em kindly, being as I'd been barefooted in the snow for a mite. "His soles are made out of leather," Fritz mumbled. "Ah, he's like a dinosaur. He doesn't know when he's hurt." I was going to tell him that if he wanted to hurt me, he should try kicking my shins, but I thought better of it. After a while, Grandpa Eliphalet groaned, "In the ravine, damn you! There's a cave there. I shoved the papers into it." "Yah!" Kurt said, mighty pleased. "I hope you're not lying. Come, Fritz, you stay here and guard these two." "Shall I?" "Wait till I have the papers. Then you may kill them." "You're right on friendly," I told him. "Hey, Grandpa, did you say the cave in the wash?" He just groaned, and Kurt and two others started down the bank. Fritz whirled his gun by its trigger guard and grinned. I yelled after Kurt, "You stay out in that there cave, hear me?" He shouted back, "Shoot the soldier Fritz if he gets troublesome." Then he was gone. I figured, shucks, it was time to do something, so I started to work on the ropes that tied my arms back of me to the tree. Fritz noticed what I was doing, told me to stop, but I didn't pay him no mind. He circled around back of me and hit my hands with his gun, talking to himself. I just kept on working. So he came round in front of me, stepped up close, and shoved a pistol muzzle into my stomach. "Very well, I shall shoot you," he said. "Heil!" He couldn't have knowed very much about feuding, or he wouldn't have come so close. I slammed my head down hard, hit him on the forehead, got an uncommon splitting headache right then. I heard the gun drop on my toe, and Fritz wavered round a bit, grinning silly-like, and fell over after a while. He had a fearful lump starting on his hairline. Anyhow, I didn't need to pay him no mind now, so I just worked myself free and picked up his gun. Grandpa Eliphalet was shouting at me to set him loose, but I was in a hurry. Kurt and his friends were already way down the wash. I ran along the bank, kicking up a flurry of snow till I caught up with them. They was right near the cave, plowing away at a great rate, and sometimes splashing in the stream where it wasn't all ice. "Hey!" I yelled down at them. "You stay out in that cave." But they only shot off their guns, not aiming very careful, and talking in some foreign language. I fired back at 'em, missing my aim because I'd never handled this kind of pistol before. I plugged one of 'em in the arm, but it was the left one, and I felt bad. Ma would have whaled me for that sort of shooting. Finally, my gun was empty, so I threw it down at Kurt and jumped after it. The drop was only 25 feet or so, and I landed right on top of one of the men. It was the feller with the busted arm. At least it was only his arm was busted, for I fell on him. After that, he just lay with his head in a snowbank and his feet kicking feeble-like. That left 3 of 'em, but they'd been shooting so wild, 2 fellers had to stop to reload. The one with the gun fired at me, increasing my ribs as I rushed him. Using strategy, I fell down and rolled a mite till I could grab his legs. The others were rushing in, ready to finish me, but I just stood up, holding the gunman's feet so he would have been dangling down if I hadn't started to swing him around. He yelled, and the pistol went sailing off into a bush. I sort of braced myself and kept swinging him rapid, figuring he'd knock Kurt and the other man down. It worked out that way, too. After a mite, I let go, and the feller shot across the wash and kind of carooned off a big rock there. He vanished out of sight behind it, and I didn't hear nothing more from him. Kurt had scrambled up and was running toward the cave, but the other man was wriggling around and bringing his gun to bear on me. There wasn't time to persuade him proper, so I jumped and came down heavy on his stomach.
He didn't want to let go of the fire iron, though, but he did after I'd trampled him a speck. "Ach," he said, "der Blitzkrieg." But them was his expiring words. Kurt was already inside the cave when I caught up with him. He was bent over, stowing some papers in his pocket, but he swung around and shot at me, missing bad. I didn't have no gun, and I couldn't be bothered looking around for one, so I stooped down and packed up a clod of snow. Just as I threw it, one of Kurt's bullets whanged into my shoulder, and my whole left arm went numb. But I got good aim, even Ma admits that, and the snowball spattered all over Kurt's face. There must have been some dirt in it, too, from the way Kurt acted. I ran and grabbed a gun, but he didn't want to let go. He kicked me in the shins, which allus makes me lose my temper. So I kept hold of his wrist and swung him around a trifle, sort of battering him against the walls. He stopped screaming after a bit, being kind of bashed up, and when I let go, he sailed out in the mouth of the cave and never once stopped till he ran into a pine tree across the wash. After that, he rolled down into the stream and didn't make no more remarks. I was bleeding a trifle, but shucks, I still had work to do. So I drugged the four fellers out of the ravine and back up to where I'd left Grandpa Eliphalet. I took a jug of corn with me, and after we got Grandpa untied, I revived him a trifle while I waited for him to simmer down. But then Jimmy came staggering up the slope, leading the whole army, with the colonel and the major in the front, and I had to hide the jug under a bush. There was so much going on, I kind of lost track till I was back in camp tent with Jimmy, lying on my cot, wriggling my toes comfortable like. It made me laugh to think of the fuss they made over my shoulder. What with bandages and medicine, Ma would have slapped a poultice on it, poured a gallon of corn down my throat, and whopped me for getting into trouble. Only, as I figured it, I hadn't gotten in trouble. Just the opposite from what Jimmy explained to me. "They were spies, foreign agents, Sonk," he told me, puffing at a cigarette as he pulled off his shoes. "You'll get a medal for this, I bet." "Shucks," I said. "I was just safeguarding my rights." He looked at me kind of puzzled, but went on talking. "Grandpa's alloy's real good. The colonel's sending him to Washington tomorrow with his formula for the stuff. And you saved it from those dirty spies, Sonk. Bravest thing I've ever seen." "I just couldn't let him go in that cave," I said, and then shut up, seeing as I'd said too much. But Jimmy looked surprised and pestered me with questions till I had to tell him after I'd made him promise to keep it secret. "Where do you think I get my corn?" I asked him. "It ain't sent in from Kentucky. I got me a still." Jimmy's jaw dropped. "You don't mean—" "Sure," I said. "It's in that cave. Mind you don't tell about it now, or I won't give you a swaller. And that's mighty good corn. Uncle Elmer showed me how to make it." Jimmy was laughing fit to bust, but he finally sobered down. "Okay, Sonk," he told me. "You been running an illicit still back in the woods. I won't squeal. Besides, you're still a hero. You captured those spies, didn't you?" "Shucks," I said. "I thought they was revenuers."